The best place to hide the truth is in the pages of a book.
Maybe we should just read. Maybe we should just read.
Welcome to Hayes Reviews. Hello there, everybody. This is Nick, creator of Hayes Reviews. Welcome back to another episode. Tonight is going to be, as usual, another live reading, and we're going to be finishing off the book that we've been reading for the last couple of weeks, 3 weeks or so. G. Edward Griffin's Fearful Master from 1964, a second look at the United Nations. What a ride it has been. This is flown by, actually, reading this book. There hasn't been a dull moment. It has been action-packed, information, non-stop roller coaster ride of what I would say is hidden history. This is not the kind of narrative that we get in our schools and on our television sets. This is the kind of narrative that we have to go digging around on the internet to find old books published in the 60s to learn about. But we did it, and we are coming to the end of the book, and we've got 2 chapters to read tonight. So I hope you're all doing well out there if you are tuning in live. And if you're watching on the replay, don't forget there's a pinned comment underneath the video with timestamps, so you are able to jump ahead to the relevant part of the video. You don't have to do it in real time. You can listen to it on 1.5 speed or even 2x. That's a good way to get information quickly if you are hungry and ravenous for information and you want to digest as much information-packed content as possible. Then the 1.5x and the 2x speeds are a good way to do that. I've re-listened to my broadcast back in 1.5x speed, and it's fine. You don't miss anything. I guess I speak quite slowly, and so speeding it up that little bit, it's still intelligible, and it's a good way to get through these longer form videos. So if you're watching back on the replay, bear that in mind. To everyone who's here live, sincere thanks for tuning in. It's very good to have you here, and I'm glad that you're back with me to finish off this book. What do you think? What do you think? Presuming if you're tuning in live, you've caught some of the previous videos in this series. What are your thoughts? What were your hot takes from this book? Anything eye-opening? Anything you didn't know before? I suppose I can give a little bit of a rundown. I don't have a preamble ramble prepared tonight as such. It's been a bit of a busy week for me, and so I haven't got any tabs or juicy Wikipedia articles highlighted in preparation. But the book has given us a good little rundown on the United Nations, its origins, and the kinds of people who were involved in it from the beginning. And by learning these things, we can come to a better understanding of what this organization is actually all about. Like so many things in the modern age, we are told a certain outward-facing narrative. Let's say, I think the exoteric, the outward-facing narrative of something is often very different to the esoteric, the inward-facing. What's going on behind the scenes, in other words. Think of it like the Wizard of Oz. You've got the fireworks going off and the smoke billowing out and this giant head hovering in the air with a booming voice giving you all these decrees and commands and all this information and looking very scary and authoritative. But when you pull back the curtain, there's a scared little man there pushing buttons and spinning wheels and speaking into a microphone, and it's all just a trick. It's a technological gimmick designed to confuse and impress and make people believe in authority that isn't actually really there. Could the United Nations be pulling a similar trick and a similar scam on everybody. It certainly looks that way after reading G. Edward Griffin's book. From my point of view, I think many people assume that the United Nations is benevolent. On its Wikipedia page, it does say it is a peacekeeping outfit. I was going to say a peacekeeping force, but to my mind, that's a bit of an oxymoron if you are a peacekeeping force. And actually, though, in this case, the oxymoron is probably appropriate and correct to use to describe the United Nations, because as we learned in the very first part of the book, they went into the peaceful city of Katanga and they used force because they wanted to prevent force from being used. And that's how you prevent force, by doing force, right? So if you want to prevent war, you got to go do some war. That's how it works. And so that was the first part of the book. It was all about this case study of Katanga, which is a city in the Congo. And at this time, there were efforts underway to gain political control over this area. And previous to the 1960s, when these events were happening that are described in the book, Katanga was under Belgian control. And so there was a colonial power there. And what was happening was the communists, the Soviets, they were running their usual sort of socialist/communist scam on, and saying, you got to fight these colonists. You got to fight the imperial rule. This is no good, because the capitalists and the imperialists and the colonists, they're only interested in exploiting the worker and keeping the money and the wealth for themselves. And there's some truth to that. But really, when you get into it, all the systems that we've been told about, all the isms that we've been given, they just describe a system with a tiny minority wielding massive amounts of influence, power, wealth, and the rest of us kind of scrabbling around. Now, I think there's a good argument to be made that where there is less bureaucratic, centralized power meddling in the affairs of the average person, then more wealth and productivity can take place, and people's standard of living will arise. I think there's a good argument for that. And I spoke with in the comments under Nigel Watson's video with some people who were asking this question: was there ever a country or ever a time where people did enjoy some measure of freedom and the system worked, and it worked for the benefit of the many instead of the enslavement of the many for the benefit of the few? And I'm not so keyed up and clued up on history as to be able to pull out some examples. Nigel Watson had a go, and he pointed to Hong Kong and 50s and 60s America and England in the Industrial Revolution. So it's hard to say, but I do think that what was going on in the Congo, in Katanga at this time, Katanga had a rich wealth of mineral resources, and they were very important to that area, and to whoever controlled them, they could get the benefit of being able to process and sell and trade those resources. And there was a power struggle going on. The people of Katanga wanted to be self-governing. They wanted to run the community in which they lived, handle the resources and the natural advantages of being there themselves, and trade sort of with the surrounding areas based on what they thought was best for them in that community. The wider thinking of the nations and the areas, well, the rest of the Congo, I should say, they didn't want that. They wanted to centralize things. They wanted the Republic of the Congo to be, they wanted Katanga to be folded into and incorporated in that. And so there were communist-backed agitators pushing for this sort of system to be built, because as we know, communism always requires the centralization of control and a bureaucracy to run everything and to manage everything and to tell everyone what they are getting, to gather all the resources into one place and then give that out from a central point. It's not very compatible with a group of people, a community who want to self-govern and run themselves as an autonomous community, for example. Maybe that's on the scale of a village, a town, a city, maybe even a whole province or a county, as we have in England. that's always the enemy of these kinds of systems, the communist kind of systems, because they want to tell you what to do from afar. And think about the taxation system. It gathers your taxes and they go off to some capital city somewhere, and then some bean counters take their slice and their cut, and then it gets sent to a little hub, perhaps a few miles away from where you live. And then those people in that little hub then send a little bit over to the council where you live. And this system is obviously bloated and overly complex and doesn't really serve the people who are paying into it, particularly the people who pay into it for a long period of time and expect to get something at the end of it. Nope. And so these kind of struggles and these kind of competing systems were going on at this time in the Congo and in this place called Katanga. And what we learned from G. Edward Griffin was that the UN and America tended to come down on the side of the people who were pushing for the communist system, which was very interesting and perhaps not what you would expect. I think a lot of people would assume that given the Cold War, given the current day tensions between Russia, what's going on in the Ukraine, and the kind of NATO and the rest of it going up against them, that this Soviet/communist system was a bad thing, and they were the enemy and they were the bad guys. So why is this supranational organization, the United Nations, seeming to prop up and support and come down on the side of the communists again and again and again? That is the big question mark, right? And as we've discussed in a previous video in this series, the dialectic between the communists and the West was kind of a managed one from the start, because the money came from the same place. It always goes back to the wealthy industrialists, the bankers, the banking families, these kind of bloodlines who amass huge amounts of wealth over generations and keep it in the family, and often marrying in the family in order to allow that to happen. These are the people again and again who prop up certain factions and groups and influential figures who we think of as influential. Your kind of Karl Marx and your Engels and the rest of them. They're all paid for. They're all supported and propped up by money. Where does that money come from? When you really start to look into it and follow it back, you realize that they fund both sides. Just like in a war, the banking families come along and they say, yes, we'll give you some money, and yes, we'll give you some money over there. And they know that they are going to win regardless of the outcome of the war, because they've lent money to both sides, and they get the repayments and the interest regardless of who wins that war, right? So there are entities above and outside of the nation states. There are entities above and outside of the competing economic systems, and I think that is what we're kind of seeing and learning and witnessing in this book, is that the UN is one such entity. And I think it's best to think of it as, when pieces are getting moved around on the chessboard, the UN is kind of scrap the chessboard metaphor. I've got a better one, and this is from my good friend Bai in the Telegram chat. He said it's like, imagine a seesaw, and on one side you've got the blue team and the red team, you've got the communists and the capitalists, whatever dialectic. The group we're talking about, the group who are really in control, they're balancing there right in the middle, and they just have to lean a little bit either way to decide the outcome of this supposed conflict and tension that we're all sold as a sort of genuine, that the outcome is unknown, and the conflict is going to be down to things like military intelligence and might and resource allocation and planning and strategy and all these other things. Well, it's not really. It's that blob of bureaucratic controllers sitting in the middle of the seesaw, and they look around and they can decide which way they're going to tilt it for their own purposes. They can line up their investments, they can get their money in the right place, then they can lean over on the seesaw, make this side collapse, lose, force them to pay reparations, force them to take out massive loans in order to rebuild the infrastructure that's been destroyed in the conflict, for example. And they can plan ahead because they know that they get to choose which side wins and loses, so they can place their investments, they can get ready to move in, and then capitalize on that crisis. And I don't think most people realize that is really that is more like how the game is played, the game of nations, or the game of history, let's even say. And so we're getting a glimpse of that in this book, how the United Nations is clearly biased. It is not a neutral organization. It is not an organization that exists to serve some sort of perfect abstract notion of justice and fairness and equality, right? Even though to this day that is what they will tell you that they are doing. So what happened in Katanga ended up being a complete massacre of the local people by UN troops. And Ed Griffin points out that there were many other places in the Congo at this time that could have used some serious UN intervention because there were horrific things going on. Katanga was a peaceful place. It was a peaceful place that had a community that wanted to be left alone, that wanted to govern themselves and take their own destiny into their own hands. And that could not be allowed. And so the UN troops went in and they just massacred a bunch of people. So that was part one of the book. Very eye-opening. Part two, what happened in part two? Anyone out there to remind us and let us know what was going on? I don't think part two was really, wasn't a narrative of such. Part two was more telling us about the origins of the United Nations and the people involved in setting it up and planning it. There was a bunch of Americans who were involved in the planning and the setting up of the United Nations who eventually were outed as communist spies, communist sympathizers, members of the Communist Party. And in many cases, if not in most cases, nothing was done. They were given tens of thousands of dollars, which back in the 60s was a decent size amount to retire, to just quietly walk off stage, and enough said about that. And there was a whole trial before Congress explaining and pointing the finger as to who these people were. And it really wasn't treated with any kind of urgency. It's not like the American government quickly took action to remove themselves from the United Nations, from this association, and from all the agreements. No, it went the other way, making more agreements, signing up to more treaties, and putting in these mechanisms which would supersede the authority of the existing governmental structure in the USA. Now, this is very USA focused because Ed Griffin is an American, and so he's writing from the point of view of an American, right? And what adherence and loyalty to the United Nations has meant for the average American. One interesting thing that came out of the book is how the Americans are footing the bill via taxes for the propping up and the enhancement of communist regimes and communist countries. And the mechanism for this is what's known as foreign aid. So your taxpayer money gets hoovered up, sent over, and then sent overseas. But it's getting sent overseas to communist countries, communist-run countries, countries that are sympathetic to the communist cause and the Soviet cause back then. Before the Cold War, leading into the Cold War. That's very strange that the taxpayer money of a free, democratic country such as America would be used to benefit these supposedly antagonistic countries and economic systems, right? Well, these systems are not antagonistic. The dialectic is managed, and it's a fake dialectic, and it's one that has been used to gradually, slowly, step by step, transform the American system and the American way of life into the communist system and the sort of socialist communist way of life. And now, as Nigel Watson said in our conversation earlier in the week, now we're facing technocracy. It's not really any of the communism, socialism, capitalism that we read about in the history books. We've moved on from that now due to the technology that we have that is used against us, that is ubiquitous to our very lives. The technology that's allowing me to broadcast to you right now and for you to hear my words and see my face and enjoy and take part in this transmission. This is also the technology that's going to bring about a very sinister and creepy technocratic system of control. Just today, I went to the supermarket and I noticed they've installed a load of fencing And so when you walk in the past, you would walk in and it was a big open space. To your right, there was a tobacco counter. There was the clothes rails to the left. And then off, there was a couple of aisles. You can go and look at the vegetables and whatnot. But it was open. Now it's fenced off. And in order to get into the main part of the supermarket, you have to walk through this little opening fence gate thing. And right above that is a big monitor and 2 cameras. And I have absolutely no doubt that is facial recognition and that will feed into some future situation that we are facing whereby you got to have the right face or you ain't getting into that supermarket. And I think I've even noticed them putting doors on over a lot of the fridges, which previously didn't have doors. Another layer between you and the product and the item that you want to buy. Is there going to be some sort of biometric access to get into these fridges where the meat is held? If the meat is going to be rationed and it's going to be hard and more expensive, people are going to want that meat because it's the most bioavailable, nutrient-dense food that we can eat as human beings. Are they going to have to say, well, because there's not so much meat, we're going to have to ration it, we're going to have to put it behind this lock and key, and only the people who've got the right social credit score connected to their thumbprint or their facial scan or their iris scan or whatever are going to be able to go in and get their ration of meat. The good citizens who pay their taxes on time and never say a bad word about the regime and don't spread this dangerous misinformation, right? You can see the technology being built around us, it's like boiling the frog. Although I heard Jack Spirko on his recent podcast saying frogs will jump out of the water long before they boil. But I think the metaphor still works, right? And you all have heard that, I think. That's kind of what's happening. Stepwise, little by little, introducing these extra things for your convenience because we want to help you and make your life easier. That's the system we're in. But back in the 60s, in order to get this to happen, they didn't have the technology in place, right? And so they had to have this dialectic, and they had to run up this sort of the Red Scare, the red under the bed, and there's communists everywhere, and communists hate our freedom. And in order for us to protect you from the communists, we're going to have to, put more fences in and put more security checks in and give more money to the military and give more money to the police and train the police and give them more weapons and gadgets and gizmos with which they can use to root out the communist red threat and bash them on the head and spray them in the eyes or whatever it is that the thugs and the police like to do. It's always the same thing. It's always, here's the threat, and in order for us to protect you against this threat, we're going to have to do all this stuff that you would never let us do otherwise because it's invasive, it erodes your freedoms, it makes your life more inconvenient, it makes you, it chips away at your privacy, it chips away at your, there's another, your sense of, it's like when you go to the airport and you get pat down and they root through your bags. It's an affront to your dignity, is what it is. That's the word I was looking for. And they have to keep doing it all the time, little by little, with the justification of protecting you, right? Mummy and daddy state, looking after you, protecting you from the bad guys and the enemies. And this is what was going on back in the 60s. And it's very fascinating and interesting to see how it has morphed and evolved up to the present day. And it has become very different now, of course. So that was kind of part 2 of the book, the origins of the UN, the people who set it up, the fact that they were very much aligned with the Soviets, who were supposed to be the enemies. So very interesting there. Then after that, what do we get? Let's see. That was kind of part 2. Part 3 was psychological warfare. This was all about how the United Nations has been sold to the American people to get people not to question it and assume it's benevolent and beneficial and good and fantastic and wonderful while they are being taxed, while their money is being hoovered out and sent abroad to prop up regimes and that they wouldn't want to prop up with their money. That bit was quite revealing as well, because the psychological aspect to it goes pretty deep, and they aim that at children. And I've got a bit of evidence that we might get time to read through today if we get through this chapter, these last 2 chapters. But the psychological warfare part was pretty impressive because it's still going on. Okay, that's enough rambling. I think I've given you all enough time to figure out that I'm live and to join the stream. So how are you all doing? We got Turbs over on Rumble. Good evening. Guest gone, feet up. I can chill again. Looking forward to what gems the ending may have. Yeah, excellent. Turbs makes the point that if the UN never existed, something else would have taken its place. Yeah. Well, it was the League of Nations, and then it became the United Nations. And if the United Nations collapsed, they would have brought out something else as well. So I totally agree. It's a plan. It's been very long in the making. It goes back to H.G. Wells and his open conspiracy, but it goes back even further than that. You know, the thing about tyrants, the thing about people who crave control and power and influence and money and wealth is you can never have enough of it. That's the problem with greed. That's the problem with addiction. The hungry ghost is never satisfied. You just need more and more and more. And of course, the most you can have is a one world system, a one world government, a one world control infrastructure that you sit at the top of, at the apex of that control structure. And this is why the pyramid with the eye on the top, the all-seeing eye, is such an emblem, such a remarkable symbol for what is going on in the world. I know Mark Passio always mentions how on the dollar bill, the capstone of the pyramid is slightly raised. And that represents how close they are to fulfilling their goal of this total, complete control, surveillance, digital system. When that final capstone is lowered and connected, that is the cage being closed, the key being turned in the lock and being thrown away, and there's no way out at that point. And we're on the precipice of that. We are on the precipice now of like absolute digital control over every aspect of our lives. I went to post a letter today. It wasn't even my letter. It was my grandmother's letter. She just asked me to drop it off at the post office. So I went in and I said, I want to post these. And one was to USA. One was to Canada. And the USA one, he just went, yeah, printed a thing, put a label on it, chucked it in a bag. The Canada one, he said, name. I said, what do you mean name? He said, your name. And I had to give him my name, my address, postcode, and the number of the house that I live in, just to post a letter overseas to Canada. Is that normal? Why do you need what's in it? That's photographs. How many photographs? I don't know how many photographs, like 10 photographs? Okay, what's your name? What's your address? What's your postcode? All those details had to be typed into the system before I was allowed to pop an envelope of photographs in the mail to go to Canada. The level of scrutiny over your lives of you need a phone number to access things. You need to put it, Joe, just so we can be sure it's you. Give us your name and the digits of your phone number, and we'll send you a code, and you can type that code back into a laptop. You know, so you can see these hooks. They're just getting more and more hooks in, little by little, step by step, and eventually there'll be no way to disentangle yourself from it. That is the scary part of it, and it's been a plan. That's been the goal of, because as long as we've had tyrants and power-hungry maniacs who are willing to deceive and lie and cheat and steal and threaten and coerce and do all these horrific things, as long as we've had those people, which is forever, that's as long as we've had an appetite which can only be limited by the limits of, this place where we live, whatever shape, size you think it is, right? Their appetite goes that far, that big, that wide, that vast, that huge. That's what they're after, and they always will be. So we've got to be vigilant, we've got to be very prepared, and we have to be wise to the plans and the schemes, right? So let's have a little review of YouTube. Say hello to Frank, Shame Anarchist, Adam, Ashley Styles, Elizabeth Kendall, and Gwen, and Hasdak, and Enfuego. Hello to you all. Very good to have you all here. Shame Anarchist says they think you are sending anthrax through the post. Hey, do I give off Uncle Ted vibes? Was it Uncle Ted that did the anthrax? No, it wasn't, was it? That he did a different thing. The anthrax came after the Big Nine event in September, didn't it? 2001. Well, maybe my granny's the type of person who would do that. Maybe it's Granthrax. It's Granthrax. That's the new conspiracy. Celine Lyon just popped into the chat. Good evening to you. Shame Anarchist says this book full of insider information and quotes from some of the perpetrators. Yeah, that's a very good little summary there. It's packed full of quotes, isn't it? And reference materials. And as I mentioned in the very first video, I got another when I bought this book. He's got a list of his sources in the first page, and I have now got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Have I got that one? I think I've got all 6. I think I got all 6. I managed to track down copies of all 6 of the books that he used to write this one and quoted from. That's the blessing and the curse about being a book collector, is every new book you buy has a bibliography, and then it leads you to like 10 more books that you feel like you've got to buy, and it's just never ending. But yeah, the quotes are absolutely fantastic. That's why I think the book is so powerful. That's why it's easy to read. It's just bombshell after bombshell, and it just shows an incredible level of research and attention to detail. Like, imagine how much, let's say all he did was read the other 6 books. That's going to be about, I don't know, let's say 10 hours per book. That's conservative. That's 60 hours of work right there just to read all those books. Plus he went through all the UNESCO documents. He went through the UN documents. It's an incredible bit of research. So for a tiny little paperback, you know, it packs quite a punch. And so I think I totally agree. Very very excellent summary there from Shamanakist. We got Total Blackout Painting, who is lurking and listening. Good evening. And Christine Massot as well. Good evening. Another chapter to make my brain exercise. Thank you. Yes. All right. Wonderful. Well, I think that's enough rambling, and I've said my hellos. So thank you for being here. Just a reminder, if you want to support at any point, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews has got all the stuff that I have that you might need to stay in touch, to make sure you don't miss a stream, to get in touch with me, to send a donation if you feel inclined to do so. I would be very much grateful and appreciative if you feel that my work here is worthwhile. And the more people support by liking, sharing, commenting, and subscribing, the more books we can read and get on the record, and we can create a good little sort of archive of useful information that ties together and tells a more accurate picture of what the hell's going on in the world. Because let's face it, a lot of people are very confused. And the only way, in my opinion, the best way we can unconfuse ourselves is to read books by people who've done the digging and made these incredible tools for our benefit, you know? If G. Edward Griffin hadn't gone down the path he went down and done this research, and, you know, it's kind of like climbing a mountain. We're standing at the bottom of the mountain looking up going, what the hell, how are we going to get up there? And Ed Griffin's standing there, and he's already pegged out a route, and he's put some little waypoints in, and he's highlighted where you've got to grab hold and where you can put your feet, the safe places to footholds and handholds. And he's saying, okay, this is how you get up. And I've already been it and charted it and done the hard bit. Now all you need to do is follow the path that I've laid out, and you know, you can make progress much faster. That's what books do for people. They accelerate learning and improve and increase awareness and understanding. And for that, I think we should all be very grateful and definitely feel, you know, if there are reasons to be black-pilled and down and negative and fed up, one of the blessings of the modern world is that we are, yes, like we're drowning in information, and the truth is out there, to use a Fox Mulder cliche from the X-Files. But the truth is out there. And, you know, as the tagline to the channel says, I think the best place to hide it is in the pages of a book, because we've all been conditioned and trained not to bother reading books for the most part. But not us, not we few here on the Hayes Reviews channel. So let's get into it. The Fearful Master. So I think we've got about 30 pages to get through tonight. And ESP has just popped into Odyssey. Good timing. You made it right in time for the reading. So well played. We've got about 30 pages to get through. And if we have a little bit of time at the end, we might move on to a bonus reading. Which, if you've watched some previous videos, you might have an idea of what it could be. All right, let's get my position. And zoom in a bit. How's that? So this is chapter 17. Chapter 17, Point of No Return. And we have a quote from Supreme Court Justice George Sutherland. The saddest epitaph which can be carved in memory of a vanished liberty is that it was lost because its possessors failed to stretch forth a saving hand while yet there was time. Wow. How appropriate to what I was just ranting about. It's not too late to do something about it, but we may live to see a time where it is too late to do something about it, unfortunately. Point of no return. In the northern reaches of the globe live tiny, rodent-like creatures called lemmings. They lead a rather solitary life and seem to be well adjusted to their environment. I feel like I should be doing what's he called? The guy who does all the nature documentaries in the UK. He's kind of like David Attenborough. In the northern reaches of the globe live tiny, rodent-like creatures called lemmings. How was that? You can rate my David Attenborough impression in the chat. Marks out of 10. They look and behave in quite a normal fashion, except for one curious idiosyncrasy. Every once in a while, after several years of unusual prosperity for the lemming clan, they suddenly get an uncontrollable urge to go for a swim. Almost as though on cue, they come from all the remote parts of the terrain and joining together into one huge army, march relentlessly to the sea. When they get there, they fling themselves into the surf and swim straight out from shore. Days later, the beaches are piled deep with the tiny bodies where the tide has washed them up to decay in the sun. Nothing resembles these lemmings quite so much as the way we Americans have been stampeding to our own destruction. We have already abandoned the secure ground of national strength and independence to leap into the boiling waters of internationalism. We are swimming straight out to sea as though there were a brighter, more secure paradise just ahead. But the water gets deeper by the minute and our strength is beginning to ebb. Soon, even if we change our minds and decide to turn back to shore, it will be too late. We are rapidly approaching the point of no return. Disarmament. Almost everyone, of course, is opposed to war, particularly nuclear war, and we would all like to see the nations of the world throw their weapons on the scrap heap and live peacefully together. In fact, this has been an ancient desire of noble-minded men since the dawn of history. But does getting rid of one's best weapons prevent war? Unfortunately not. It merely means that men then fight with their second-best weapons. Or it may mean that one side fights with its second-best weapons, while the other uses superior weapons that everyone thought had been destroyed, but which had been kept and perfected in secret. It is true that in the past, arming has always led to war, but so has disarming. Remember Pearl Harbor and Korea? As a matter of fact, most wars would never have been started but for the aggressor thinking he was sufficiently superior in military forces to overcome the opposition. A disarmed nation, therefore, is far more likely to be attacked and plunged into war than one that is armed. This is particularly true in the world of today, where international communism is carrying out its avowed program of global conquest. High-ranking Soviet military officers who have defected to the West have told us that the communists are just waiting for us to lower our guard. Nikolai F. Artamanov, for instance, a former Soviet naval captain, testified on September 14, 1960, before the House Committee on Un-American Activities and said that Soviet strategy is based upon a surprise nuclear attack on the US if the Soviet leaders could be assured that victory would come at once. Note, however, that the communists do not want to inflict nuclear devastation on America. They want to capture our great nation intact with all of our skilled labor and productive capacity to feed and support their world slave empire. Nuclear war is a last resort for them, and then only if they are positive of immediate victory. Some people find comfort in this thought, but it is doubtful that they have any idea of what living under communism is like. They feel that any life, even life inside a communist slave labor camp, is better than risking death under the A-bomb. They are willing to send our young men into battle to the four corners of the world to die for their safety and freedom here at home, but they are not willing to risk their own hides for the same cause. Patrick Henry's choice of liberty or death has now given way to the better read than dead motto of San Francisco's beatniks and Washington's too. As Adlai Stevenson paraphrased it, quote, "Compared with the stake of survival, every other interest is minor and every other preoccupation petty." If mere survival has now become more important to Americans than freedom and all other interests or preoccupations, then the men who sacrificed their lives at Lexington and Concord, at Valley Forge, at Saipan and Normandy must loathe us from the grave, for we have asked them to die in vain. The truly ironic part about all of this, however, is that we do not have to choose between being red or dead at all. If we wake up and move into action, we can be both alive and free. All we have to do is be realistic about our situation and come to grips with the fact that so long as the Kremlin is dedicated to world domination, we have no choice but to keep ourselves well armed with the very latest weapons. Strength is the only language the communists understand, and it is the only thing that has kept their commissars out of our country so far. That Senator Barry Goldwater is one of the realists who understands these facts of life is clear from his voting record against disarmament proposals as well as from his following remarks. Quote, "If an enemy power is bent on conquering you and proposes to turn all of his resources to that end, he is at war with you. And you, unless you contemplate surrender, are at war with him. Moreover, unless you contemplate treason, your objective, like his, will be victory. Not peace, but victory." Peace, to be sure, is a proper goal for American policy as long as it is understood that peace is not all we seek. For we do not want the peace of surrender. We want a peace in which freedom and justice will prevail, and that, given the nature of communism, is a peace in which Soviet power will no longer be in position to threaten us and the rest of the world. A tolerable peace, in other words, must follow victory over communism. We have been years trying to bury that unpleasant fact. It cannot be buried, and any foreign policy that ignores it will lead to our extinction as a nation. We do not, of course, want to achieve victory by force of arms if possible. Overt hostilities should always be avoided, especially is this so when a shooting war may cause the death of many millions of people, including our own. But we cannot, for that reason, make the avoidance of a shooting war our chief objective. If we do that, if we tell ourselves that it is more important to avoid shooting than to keep our freedom, we are committed to a course that has only one terminal point: surrender. Everyone knows that the Soviets have always been among the most outspoken advocates of disarmament. Unfortunately, too many Americans have taken this at face value and assumed that the motive behind this was an honest desire to spare mankind from the horrors of war. But what are the horrors of war? Why, death and destruction, of course. Yet, the communists have perpetrated more death and destruction behind the iron and bamboo curtains than most of the wars of history combined. The only difference was that there was no organized opposition. The millions who have been executed did not die in combat, but in concentration camps. This, of course, is what the communists mean when they advocate peace, the elimination of all opposition to communism. How sincere are they, then, when they promote disarmament? To answer that question, it is necessary to look back to the year 1928. One of the principles expounded at the Sixth World Congress of the Communist International in that year was, quote, "The disarmament policy of the Soviet government must be utilized for purposes of agitation, for recruiting sympathizers for the Soviet Union." 33 years later, Khrushchev revealed that the communist strategy in this regard had not changed one iota. Speaking in Moscow on January the 6th, 1961, he declared that the propaganda effectiveness of promoting a Soviet-inspired peace program was an effective means of wooing the sympathy of the masses behind the banner of communism. He even admitted that the Kremlin's plan was to make the slogan for peace fit hand in hand with the slogan for communism. Speaking very candidly, he said, quote, "In the eyes of the masses, communism will appear as a force capable of saving mankind from the horrors of modern destructive missile nuclear war. While imperialism, meaning capitalism, is ever more associated in the minds of the masses as a system engendering wars. That is why the slogan of the struggle for peace is, as it were, a Sputnik, meaning fellow traveler, of the slogan of the struggle for communism." What a beautiful strategy this has been, appealing to the natural desire in all of us for peace. The communists have been able to enlist literally thousands of well-meaning Americans into campaigning for disarmament and other communist objectives. So this reminds me very much of Fabian Freeway and all the chapters about how they came to America and set up different groups and were targeting university students with their propaganda and their plays and books and all the things and speeches and essays and things that they were putting out, right? And Adam gave me an 8 out of 10 for my impression earlier, and Gwen gave me 10. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Where did we just get to here? Housewives, students, professors, and ministers. Yeah, there you go. Students. Housewives, students, professors, and ministers have been enticed into supporting organizations and groups whose platforms read like a page out of the communist People's World. The Turn Toward Peace movement, for instance, is one of the largest and best known of these groups. The following is just a partial list of the initiatives recommended in their official program of action. 1. Urge the opening of editorial columns of U.S. newspapers and magazines to Soviet and Red Chinese writers. 2. Double our financial support to all UN agencies such as UNICEF and UNESCO. 3. Stop all travel curbs on Soviet citizens in the U.S. 4. Invite 1,000 Soviet teachers and journalists to undertake at our expense a 3-month lecture tour of the U.S. 5. Invite 5,000 Soviet tourists to vacation at our expense in the U.S. 6. Repeal the Connolly Amendment. 7. Admit Red China to the UN. 8. Put the Peace Corps under UN administration. 9. Stop all U.S. nuclear testing even if the Soviets continue testing. 10. Invite the Soviets to plug into our missile early warning radar system. These platforms did not just happen, of course. They were carefully written by people who knew what they were doing. Both the House Committee on Un-American Activities and various state investigating committees have reported that known communists have penetrated into key positions within such groups as Women's Strike for Peace, the Committee for a Sane Nuclear Policy, and the American Friends Service Committee. The investigators made it very clear that the majority of the members of these groups had no idea that they were being used to promote communist objectives, and probably would not believe it if they were told. Unfortunately, most of them have never even questioned the sincerity of the leaders within the so-called peace movement, and fewer still have ever bothered to inform themselves of basic communist strategy. Consequently, Gus Hall, head of the Communist Party in the United States, is able to boast that the peace movements continue to gather force and momentum. He stated quite frankly that the most active of these have been the Women's Strike for Peace and the Turn Toward Peace groups. He noted that there are literally tons of literature for peace distributed in this country. Tons and tons of it. As pointed out earlier, however, the communists are agitating in this country for disarmament for a far more important reason than merely fooling a lot of innocent Americans. Going back once again to the Statement of Principles issued by the Communist Sixth World Congress in 1928, we find, quote, "The aim of the Soviet proposals is to propagate the fundamental Marxian postulates that disarmament and the abolition of war are possible only with the fall of capitalism." Bringing it more up to date, Khrushchev has said, quote, "The slogan for the struggle for peace must not contradict the slogan for the struggle for communism. The struggle for disarmament is an effective struggle against imperialism, for restricting its military potentialities." And in December 1960, at a Moscow meeting of representatives from all over the world, communist leaders declared, quote, "An active, determined communist struggle must be waged to force the imperialists into an agreement on general disarmament." As we shall see, Washington officialdom was thinking along exactly parallel lines and was putting the whole plan into operation just as fast as American public opinion would permit. Speaking in Geneva on July the 21st, 1955, President Eisenhower said, quote, "I have been searching my heart and mind for something that I could say here that could convince everyone of the great sincerity of the US in approaching this problem of disarmament. I should address myself for a moment principally to the delegates from the Soviet Union. I propose, therefore, that we take a practical step, that we begin an arrangement very quickly, as between ourselves immediately. These steps would include to give to each other a complete blueprint of our military establishments from beginning to end, from one end of our countries to the other. Lay out the establishments and provide blueprints to each other. Next, to provide within our countries facilities for aerial photography to the other country. Likewise, we will make more easily attainable a comprehensive and effective system of inspection and disarmament because what I propose, I assure you, would be but a beginning." If that was but a beginning, we got an idea of what may ultimately be in store for us when it was announced a few years later that the Defense Department had authorized several non-profit scientific agencies to prepare a comprehensive study of the conditions under which it would be advisable for the US not to retaliate against a surprise nuclear attack. In other words, if it looked as though the Soviets had struck a killing first blow, the plan would be to surrender without fighting. They call this strategic surrender. Seemingly in keeping with this long-range plan, President Eisenhower proposed a United Nations Atomic Energy Agency, which came into existence on October the 23rd, 1956. 3 days later, before the Senate even had a chance to legally ratify our participation, Eisenhower pledged the United States to give the new agency 11,000 pounds of uranium-235, and after that, to match the combined contributions of all other nations put together. Senator Joseph McCarthy fought hard against Senate ratification of our participation in this agency on the basis that communists in the United Nations could easily take it over and use it against us. President Eisenhower assured the Senate that, quote, "the ingenuity of our scientists will provide special safe conditions under which such a bank of fissionable material can be made essentially immune to a surprise seizure." Since our scientists were unable to prevent the communists from stealing A-bomb secrets and vital parts from right under our noses, one wonders how Eisenhower thought we were going to prevent them from doing the same thing in an international organization in which they are members and over which we have no control. At any rate, the Senate ratified our commitment on June the 18th, 1957, and by the end of October, communist bloc nations had gained full control of the UN Atomic Energy Agency. Not only did open communists quickly capture over 1/4 of the positions on the agency's board of directors, but the very top post, that of chairman of the board, was given to Dr. Pavel Winkler, a prominent communist from Czechoslovakia. Eisenhower and the State Department professed to be surprised, indignant, and perturbed. Shocker. Couldn't see that coming. Nobody could have predicted flying planes into skyscrapers. When President Kennedy came into office, he picked up right where Eisenhower left off. The Soviet Deputy Foreign Minister Vasily Kuznetsov had complained that no progress toward easing tensions between East and West could be made as long as the US maintained what he called provocative weapons. He specifically mentioned the manned bombers of our Strategic Air Command and our missiles deployed on foreign bases. He suggested that we scrap these weapons and build up, instead, a system of strictly secondary missiles and, quote, conventional non-nuclear weapons. President Kennedy's defense message to Congress in 1961 was exactly along these lines. Among the weapons deleted from the budget that year and each year thereafter were the B-70 bomber and the anti-missile missile. We have stopped production of all manned bombers, are systematically putting into mothballs those that we have, and have now replaced our overseas missiles with Polaris submarines. Commenting on President Kennedy's proposals, an article in the Chicago Sun-Times on March 30th, 1961 reported, quote, "It is known that large sections of the president's defense message were written explicitly for the consumption of top Russian officials. Moreover, on the recommendation of Charles E. Bolen, the State Department's leading expert on Russia, certain communist phraseology was inserted in the message. That much of the defense message was directed to the Soviet leaders is evident in the fact that Llewellyn E. Thompson, Jr., ambassador to Russia, was given a special briefing on it. The message will now be forwarded to him in Moscow so he can reassure Soviet officials that the U.S. is taking care not to produce a first strike capability. Most of the sessions at the White House leading up to the formulation of this policy were directed by Mr. Kennedy's chief aide, Theodore Sorensen, who repeatedly made it clear that the president wanted to avoid provocative offensive weapons. Theodore Sorensen was a conscientious objector during the Korean War. As for the Polaris missiles that are now apparently the mainstay of our ability to deter a surprise nuclear attack, how good are they? Mr. Arthur I. Waskow is the man whom the U.S. Arms Control and Disarmament Agency has appointed as the expert to draft further disarmament proposals for the United States. He revealed that in his opinion, the Polaris is not a provocative weapon because it is incapable of attacking an enemy's atomic force. This is because the megatonnage of the Polaris missile is too limited to damage hardened missile bases or to knock out a hidden base with a near miss. Waskow also pointed out that the Polaris, launched at sea with all the difficulties of precise and accurate aiming that any ship encounters, is incapable of direct hits on mobile missiles. He said that in order to avoid turning the Polaris into a provocative weapon, the Navy should restrict the number of its Polaris submarines to no more than 45. Secretary of Defense McNamara has scheduled construction of a total of 41. As a result of the last series of Soviet underwater tests of the 100 megaton bomb, it was revealed that underwater shock waves were so great that they could easily damage or destroy a submarine anywhere within hundreds of miles. A few such blasts in waters within striking distance of the relatively short-range Polaris missile could likely wipe out our entire fleet of submarines deployed there. Mr. Paul H. Nitz, as Assistant Secretary of Defense, delivered a speech in 1960 to a group of business and professional men at Asilomar on California's Monterey Peninsula. In his speech, which was sponsored by the 6th U.S. Army, the Western Sea Frontier U.S. Navy, and the 4th Air Force, Mr. Nitz advocated that we unilaterally reduce our armaments, that we scrap all our fixed-base bomber and missile bases, that we place our Strategic Air Command under NATO direction, and that we inform the United Nations, quote, that NATO will turn over ultimate power of decision on the use of these systems to the General Assembly of the UN. Yeah, what could go wrong there, right? When the press reported the substance of these proposals, alarmed citizens began to write their objections to Washington. Government officials responded by tripping all over themselves, contradicting each other's assurances and denials. For instance, Dr. Lawrence G. Osborne of Santa Barbara, California, received one reply from the Defense Department stating flatly that a proposal to turn SAC over to NATO was definitely not under consideration. Another reply from then Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson said, quote, the proposal that the Strategic Air Command be placed under the overall administration and command of NATO is one that is being given a great deal of thought and deliberation. Mr. Nitz has also recommended that Quemoy and Matsu be turned over to Red China, that we extend diplomatic recognition to Red China, and that Red China be admitted to the United Nations. Consequently, President Kennedy appointed him Secretary of the Navy. In September of 1961, the State Department finally brought forth the grand product of its long labor in the form of publication 7277, entitled Freedom from War, the U.S. Program for General and Complete Disarmament. This attractively printed booklet contains the disarmament proposals that the United States government submitted to the United Nations and outlines in detail the point of no return that is now a reality right before our eyes. The following excerpts speak for themselves. Quote, set forth as the objectives of a program of general and complete disarmament in a peaceful world, A. The disbanding of all national armed forces and the prohibition of their re-establishment in any form whatsoever other than those required to preserve internal order and for contributions to our United Nations peace force. B. The elimination from national arsenals of all armaments, including all weapons of mass destruction and the means for their delivery other than those required for a United Nations peace force and for maintaining internal order. C. The establishment and effective operation of an international disarmament organization within the framework of the United Nations to ensure compliance at all times with all disarmament obligations. No state would have a military power to challenge the progressively strengthened UN peace force. So pretty unambiguous then. Explaining in more detail just what lies behind the rather vague term disarmament, President Kennedy said that it means, quote, a revolutionary change in the political structure of the world, creation of a radically new international system, abandonment of most of the old concepts of national states, development of international institutions that would encourage nations to give up much of their national sovereignty, acceptance without question or reservation of the jurisdiction of the International Court, willingness to depend for national security on an international peace force under an immensely changed and strengthened United Nations. That is quite a quote from Kennedy, wouldn't you say? You know, I often think that people sort of, because of the Kennedy assassination, people are very, they look upon him as very different to all the other sort of presidents. And I can't really speak. I don't know much about him or his assassination or anything, but he had to be part of the club to become president in the first place. Kind of like Trump, you know. They had to be part of the club to get anywhere near that role. They've been groomed and prepared for it for a long time. So this quote here suggests President Kennedy was very much in favor of internationalism, very much in favor of a one world system, of getting rid of national, like he says there, getting rid of national sovereignty, doesn't he? Abandonment of most of the old concepts of national states. So development of international institutions that would encourage nations to give up much of their national sovereignty. So, you know, when you are, or if you are ever sold this idea that, oh, Kennedy was the hero and he was really going to fix everything and they took him out, it's like, where, really? Was he? That quote is from the Washington News. So, yeah, it's from a newspaper, so I don't know how reliable it is, but interesting nevertheless. Be good to hunt down that particular edition of Washington News, right? Oh, we've got A World of My Own over on Rumble. Good evening. Okay, commenting further on these proposals, Walt Rostow, chairman of the State Department Policy Planning Board, wrote, quote, it is a legitimate American national objective to remove from all nations, including the US, the right to use substantial military force to pursue their own interests. Since the residual right is the root of national sovereignty and the basis for the existence of an international arena of power, it is therefore an American interest to see an end to nationhood as it has been historically defined. So that was Walt Rostow. Wants an end to nationhood. And people, this is who you were electing and putting in positions of power. At this time, I don't think you could get away with saying that kind of thing as much nowadays, but at this time back then, it seems quite a lot of people were fairly open about their alliances to internationalism. I think these days they'll say one thing, but they'll do, their actions speak louder than words these days, I think. These days it's all fluff and bluster and they don't really say anything when they speak. I was watching comedian Alistair Williams on YouTube. He was reviewing Mike Obama's speech at some DNC convention or rally, and it was just empty words, a lot of speaking, but not saying anything. And that's what it's like now. You just got to watch the actions, what rules and legislation and law is being passed, what is happening around you to the places. I mentioned the supermarket, which has changed today. What is happening to your communities, to the young people, you can't really get anything from the words that these people get up and say to you anymore. I think they're just totally empty. At least back then, some of these quotes actually seem to reveal the truth and their true intentions, right? Adlai Stevenson spelled it out for all to understand when he said, quote, "In short, the US program calls for total elimination of national capacity to make international war." And then, as though inscribing the epitaph on our national tombstone, he added, "It is presented in dead earnest." The same month that the State Department, and I'm just thinking as well, like obviously this things that these people are advocating didn't happen. Obviously they continued with the military-industrial complex and growing their military presence around the world in various countries and launching various wars and skirmishes, and that's continued. But imagine now how many young people would agree with all these kinds of sentiments and comments, right? Like, yeah, we should. The West has been. The history of the West is so steeped in guilt and exploitation and slavery and murder and pillage and all those terrible things that we really should disarm ourselves. That would be the best thing to do for the world. I bet a lot of young people are probably indoctrinated with that view, right? So it's almost like they tried to launch it back in the 60s, probably couldn't quite swing it back then, but it's always been the aim. And so how do you, if you're playing like the Fabian long game, how do you drum up support for that? Well, okay, we can't get it done now. We can't get disarmament through right now. So let's go and commit a load of heinous war crimes, right? And then drum up some disarmament, some sentiment for disarmament off the back of that, right? So you can see the longer planning and the longer term sort of agenda. The goals remain the same, but okay, we can't get it through right now. We'll try a little bit further down the line and we'll position and allow a load of things to happen so that when we try and push it through next time, there'll be a lot more support for it, Okay, carrying on. The same month that the State Department submitted the US proposal for complete disarmament to the United Nations, Congress passed the necessary legislation authorizing the president to carry out all of the terms of the proposal. The so-called safeguard in the act was that no disarmament steps could be taken, quote, except pursuant to the treaty-making power of the president, which, as we have seen, poses no limitations at all. And so the US Arms Control and Disarmament Agency was created and empowered to enter into whatever disarmament agreements it desired, even without congressional consent. After the newly created agency began to swing into action, several of the congressmen who had voted for it began to wake up to the insidious nature of the whole scheme. Congressman William Bray, for instance, said, quote, "Many of us, including myself, had great hopes for the future of the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency when we voted for the authorization and appropriations for its operation. After observing the operation of this agency for 1 year, I am deeply disappointed. Instead of working on plans to represent the interests of America and the free world in disarmament plans, this agency has apparently been studying reasons for the free world to surrender to the Kremlin to avoid the strife and turmoil that is inherent in freedom." So yeah, that's the kind of, the peaceful and safe slavery or the dangerous freedom, Which one do you want? Which one are you more? Do you prefer your comfort and not having to think or deal with any challenges, being able to live the same way every day, perfectly Groundhog Day style, with no surprises and no risk, and therefore no reward and no gain? Or are you more inclined to go down the dangerous freedom route, be responsible for yourself, have to grow in character and learn how to manage complex situations where you don't know the outcome, but at least you have autonomy and individual agency to act and think and behave and bear the consequences, right? It's two very different ways of life. In 1963, there was a great deal of excitement about the Moscow Test Ban Treaty. Military men testified that such a treaty would seriously hamper our ability to keep abreast of recent Soviet weapon advances. The Senate Armed Services Preparedness Subcommittee issued a report stating that such a test ban treaty would, quote, result in serious and perhaps formidable military and technical disadvantages. The treaty was ratified, nevertheless, on the strength of so-called political advantages, which were never clearly defined. The truly amazing part of it was that there was so much widespread public opposition to the treaty. There should have been, of course, but it was interesting to see such universal concern and alarm over a test ban treaty that was nothing compared to the far more disastrous steps that had already been taken and were still being taken at that very time. Here, the American people were getting all excited over the possibility of a communist military superiority while still continuing to support policies leading to a communist military monopoly. What difference does it make whether our missiles are as good as theirs if they have control of them both? This being the case, it was puzzling at first to understand why both Washington and Moscow were pushing so hard for this particular treaty. Was it to divert attention away from the more sinister disarmament measures now being taken? Was it to further reinforce the false image that our greatest danger is from outside military attack rather than from internal subversion? Or was it primarily a propaganda weapon for the Soviets to use, showing that the United States is now so fearful of the military superiority of communism that it was willing to travel to Moscow and sign a treaty which was clearly to its military disadvantage? All of these purposes played a part, of course. But the most important feature of the entire treaty was one which received practically no public attention or concern. Buried deep within the terminology of the treaty was a phrase that took disarmament out of the proposal stage and put it in the commitment stage. When the Senate ratified the treaty, it created a supreme law of the land, which now binds the U.S., in the words of the treaty itself, to, quote, the speediest possible achievement of an agreement on general and complete disarmament under strict international control in accordance with the objectives of the United Nations. The true significance of the Moscow Test Ban Treaty, therefore, was simply to take us one more very important step closer to the ultimate transfer of our nuclear weapons to the United Nations. The first step was our formal proposal to the UN in 1961. The second was the passing of the Arms Control and Disarmament Act, which made it legally possible. The third step, the Moscow Test Ban Treaty, has committed us to carry out the plan. All that is now left is to do it. Nothing else stands in the way. Without consulting Congress or the Senate, the President and the Arms Control and Disarmament Agency can surrender our weapons whenever they wish. And so, on September the 20th, 1963, President Kennedy addressed the UN and said, quote, 2 years ago, I told this body that the United States had proposed and was willing to sign a limited test ban treaty. Today, that treaty has been signed. It will not put an end to war. It will not remove basic conflicts. It will not secure freedom for all. But it can be a lever. As Archimedes, in explaining the principle of the lever, was said to have declared to his friends, give me a place where I can stand, and I shall move the world. Exactly 4 months later, on January the 21st, 1964, President Lyndon Johnson spoke over nationwide radio and television and, parroting the sentiments of his predecessor, said, "This morning in Geneva, Switzerland, the 18-Nation Committee on Disarmament resumed its work. There is only one item on the agenda today of that conference. It is the leading item on the agenda of all mankind. And that one item is peace. We now have a limited nuclear test ban treaty. We now have an emergency communications link, a hotline between Washington and Moscow. We now have an agreement in the United Nations to keep bombs out of outer space. These are small steps, but they go in the right direction, the direction of security and sanity and peace. Now we must go further. The best way to begin disarming is to begin, and we shall hear any plan, go any place, make any plea, and play any part that offers a realistic prospect for peace." For years, the master planners have been telling the innocent assembly line workers that the UN is only a debating arena, an international forum where world opinion focuses on events of the day. As such, we have been led to believe that there is no way for the UN to legislate or to impose its will on anybody. Events in Katanga, however, should enable anyone with even a modicum of intelligence to see through that subterfuge. If the UN is successful in its present drive to acquire the full control of the complete military apparatus of the United States, including our nuclear weapons and our national armies, there will be many more Katangas to come. Some of them will be on our soil. Special UN forces have already made practice seizures of American cities. US soldiers carrying the United Nations flag and wearing UN armbands staged a mock takeover of 9 California cities on July the 31st, 1951. What? That's the same occurred in Lampasas, Texas on April the 3rd, 1952. The same at Watertown, New York on August the 20th, 1952. And in 1963, the Army announced that it was conducting similar exercises in North Carolina, South Carolina, and Georgia. What are they practicing for? Question indeed. I want to learn more about those, what would we call them? Practicing, simulations, war game scenarios. So I've never heard of that happening before. American troops, but wearing United helmets and flags or whatever, colors, practicing the seizure and the takeover of American cities. Wow. Okay. The point of no return is here now. If we cross it, we will find ourselves living in a world where the realities of peace are worse than the horrors of war, and where the suffering of life is worse than the agony of death. It will be a world of our own creating, and it will be one from which there is no escape. While there is yet a little time, the choice is ours. And that's the end of the chapter. Very in line with what I was saying in my little intro spiel tonight. What do you think? Just, I'm going to take a sip and then review the comments. Very interesting to take into account the time this was written, the date, the era, and see how much progress has been made to the agendas that Ed Griffin is outlining and warning us about, right? So I'm just going to have a quick look in YouTube. We got a few comments over there. Adam says, maybe a much younger David Attenborough. That's my impression again. Maybe the Jurassic Park David, says Shame Anarchist. Good old Jurassic Park. Speaking of Jurassic Park, how good is the Jurassic Park theme tune? Classic. Rosemary Smith says, the people you think who would be against technology, like religious followers, love it and think it's a good thing. Yeah, it's incredibly addictive, incredibly powerful. It's designed that way. It's been introduced to us as something that we can't live without. We've become hopelessly addicted to and dependent upon it. And I kind of see it as a parasite. When there was a Korean film that came out, I think it won Best Picture at the Oscars a few years ago, quite a a few years ago, and the name of it is Parasite. And it's a pretty good film, well made. For some reason, and I've been waiting for this film to come out for a long time because I really liked the director's other work. And so I was looking forward to seeing this. And for some reason, I got this impression that the film was going to be about how technology is like a parasite that lives on humanity. And when you think about it, what do we say? We say, oh, my phone's died. It's dead, right? And we carry these things around and we plug them in at night and we look after them and we buy little cases to keep them safe and we take them everywhere we go and we trust them with our pictures and our lives and our intimate moments and data and information. And, they're so addictive and people are so attached to them. Some people cannot leave the house without their phone. They panic if they suddenly realize they haven't got this thing with them, right? So I think there's a kind of parasitical kind of nature or relationship going on there. And I was really hoping that this film, Parasite, was going to explore that. And would you know it, all they said in that film was that humans are parasites on each other. And, therefore, Club of Rome style, they came up with the idea that the common enemy of man is humanity itself. Bish, bash, bosh, humans are terrible, let's get rid of them. So I was a bit disappointed. I don't know why I got the impression it was about technology, but yeah. And then the very opening scene of the film has the two teenagers in this family, and they live very, very in almost a cellar, like subterranean cellar, right? So they can't get any phone signal. And the first scene of the film is these two teenagers in the bathroom on the toilet, holding their phones up to the corner of the room to try and get a signal for their phones. And so I thought it was about technology, and then it didn't turn out to be at all. So yeah, technology is very strange. It's a blessing and a curse. We're incredibly lucky to have it, but it is being weaponized very rapidly and developed and changed. And so people need to very much be aware of that and use it cautiously and wisely and with restraint, Rosemary Smith also says, for 20 years, I've been telling people don't put your children to school. It's even worse today what they are doing to children. Well, I can't even imagine what nonsense brainwashing children are getting in school today. I don't even want to know. Frank Lennon says, crikey, sounds to me like the US were into some sort of appeasement from early in the game. Yeah, appeasement's a good word for it. What that whole bit we were just hearing described. Jane says, hello from Turkey. Jane, it's funny you show up. I saw you comment on I was looking at old videos. I forget, it might have been a Rockefeller video or something, or maybe Lusitania. And I saw you in the chat and I thought, I haven't seen Jane for a while. And now here you are. It's funny how that happens. That's very synchronistic. Good to see you in the chat again. Hope you're doing well over in Turkey. And Fuego says, yep, the Fabians were in full control of the presidency and the State Department at that point and were bringing the military to heel. Yeah, this kind of it reminds me a little bit of the two-tier policing that we've been seeing here in the UK now, in that only one side needs to get rid of their weapons and disarm. We're the good people, and we have conscience. We have a conscience, and we need to do the right thing and step up and be the bigger man and put down our weapons and allow ourselves to be stripped of our capability to defend ourselves. And there's a twisted logic there that people can fall prey to because of their desire for peace, like Ed Griffin was saying. Shamanarchist says, Kennedys are related to British royalty. Oh, I didn't know that. Just like all the others. Interesting. Norman Edward I Longshanks. Thank you for that. Rosemary says, disarming sounds like a bad thing for us and a good thing for them. Yes, exactly. Frank says, can you just imagine the UN having control of anyone's nuclear arsenal? Doesn't bear thinking about. Really, really, really bad idea. Likewise for NATO. Yep. Yeah, I mean, you can see them punching for that, though, kind of striving for it. And the attack upon national sovereignty, my feeling is that a nation is just imaginary lines, right, drawn in the ground. But at the same time, you can have nations with national identity and you can have peace. You can have nations that have their own cuisine and cultural beliefs and traditions and behaviors and rituals, and they are a cohesive unit together in one place. And each place has that. And then, if you want to move around, you can move around freely. There's no reason for the war apart from, the economics of it, the gaining of more wealth and power and plunder for the few who wield the control of those resources at a very, very high level, the big boys at the top, as Alan Watt would say. That reminds me, actually, there was a fantastic episode of Geopolitics and Empire that came out recently. I'm going to see if I can find it quick. I guess he's on Rumble. And the person he was talking to, they were having this discussion about how all wars are economic. And it was a really good point. His guest was going back to like the First World War and the economics behind that, and the Second World War and the economics behind that. Because it all comes down to plunder. It all comes down to getting your hands on the goodies. And I think people forget that, because the story we're told is more like, we are fighting for freedom and our way of life needs to be protected, and they hate our way of life, and we have to defend it and spread democracy, and this was the kind of narrative. I'm struggling to find that particular interview now on YouTube, and I can't remember the guest's name, but it was a bold guy, right? So if you want to find it, you've got a little clue there. It was a bold guy, and it was fairly recently published. And if anyone knows what I'm whittering on about and struggling to find, please do stick it in the chat and let us know. I can't even remember where it was shared. It was in one of the Telegram groups I'm in. But just relevant to the topic. And I think, no, it wasn't Stefan Molyneux. It was some, I don't know. I might have to try and find it a bit later. I might find it when the outro page is running. I could have a click through then and look for it. Because, yeah, I'm kind of... Oh, hang on. Here we go. David Skripak. There you go. Oh, it is on... Internet just dropped out there. Hopefully you can see me. I think we're back. Yeah, I can see myself moving on YouTube. We're back. They don't want me talking about geopolitics and empire, obviously. Okay. Yeah, so I was just whittering on there about how what is the cause of conflict and war, because probably, I don't know, 90, 95, 99% of the world's people don't want to go to war. They're peaceful, they're cool, they can hang out with each other, and they can get on, live side by side, peacefully, voluntarily exchanging services and products and working together. Most people want that and are built for that and are comfortable with that, until we get riled up and agitated and lied to and manipulated into clamoring for some kind of conflict and war. And the economic situation at home can lead to people thinking, well, I'll join the military because at least you get, your training and you get a pension and what not, blah, 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 blah. I get a career and I've got to pay the bills somehow, and I've got to pay the, my kids through school and all that stuff. And it's all manipulated, because I don't think human beings are by nature like warring. And I get it. People fight, there'll be fights, but I don't think humans by nature are really into, mass conflict on a grand scale of armies going up against each other. Fisticuffs fight, like a duel or something. That's one thing. Settle it between you and the other person. But I think we've been very heavily indoctrinated and manipulated to buy into war as just a normal thing. And so you can see the dialectic coming up there, whereby but somebody might have my position, might say, oh, well, if only we had NATO or the United Nations to control all the nuclear weapons and prevent us from going to war with each other. And that's exactly Bertrand Russell's thesis in the book, Has Man a Future, which we read on this channel. That's in the playlists on YouTube. So there's no easy answer, but I'm pretty sure giving NATO all the nuclear codes is not a good idea. So, Yeah. Well, I'm glad I'm back. I think I caught up with all the comments there. And Fuego says, people are so completely unaware of the current stakes of what we're up against. Ain't that the truth? Rosemary says, I've never taken my phone out. That's amazing, if that's true. I don't think I've ever met anybody who has never taken their phone out. But yeah, hats off to you. Well played. Hasdak says, back. Oh, that's because my stream cut out. Welcome, Hasdak. Good to see you. Shamanarchus is saying, shut him down. Shut him up. We got a lot invested in this ride. Well, that's my Bill Hicks impression. I know that wasn't as good as the David Attenborough one because I'm not American after all. All right, cool. I think we can crack on with the final chapter. I'm almost delaying it because I don't want the book to end because it's been such a eye-opening ride. I think as well I could probably read this one a second time because there's so much in it. I'm sure I've probably forgotten 50 or 60%, if not more, of what's in the book because I don't have a particularly good memory. And I'm sure I'll be listening back to these streams and garnering more of the information because it's dense and the quotes are great. And I think that I'm almost like don't want it to come to an end because, you know, good books, you don't want them to end, do you? You want to kind of savor them a little bit, and then as soon as it's over, you're like, oh, I kind of feel a bit empty. And we've been on a good ride here with G. Edward Griffin, and I'm going to miss his style of writing because he is definitely one of the easier authors we've had to read on the channel. His prose is very crisp, to the point, it flows, and it makes sense, and it's powerful, and it's emotive when it needs to be, and it's kind of got a dry sense of humor in places. And I think he deals with complex topics very expertly. So Celine Lyon says, am I okay listening back to my own voice? I am. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. It helps me reflect on my performance and my ability as a speaker. I pick up on my hesitations, my ums and ahs, my delays, the times when I fumble my words, and I try to create a feedback loop whereby I re-listen to my videos and I hope it improves my ability to speak in future videos, if that makes sense. Not that I give myself a grade and mark down the errors and these sorts of things, but I have a feeling that it's like music. If you play a musical instrument, it's a very good practice to listen to yourself and get a feedback loop of performing and recording and then listening. And it helps you identify things you could do better, things that might bug you and you want to change about your delivery. It's just the same sort of concept. So yeah, self-reflection, exactly. So yeah, I do. Not all the time, but I do try and, if I go on a walk, I might re-listen to one of the videos and stick it on 1.5 or 2x speed and review it because there's so much info in these that I can't remember it all. So let's do the final chapter, shall we? There's not that much. There's not that much left at all. This is going to be. It's going to be over soon. But don't worry, I got something else to do once we're through with this. Okay. Chapter 18 is Our Last Best Hope. There's a quote from Abraham Lincoln. We shall nobly save or meanly lose the last best hope of earth. Before proceeding with a discussion of possible solutions to this gigantic United Nations dilemma, it seems appropriate to examine the principal arguments so often used by sincere Americans to justify our continued support of the United Nations. These can be the equivalents of mental short circuits in an otherwise logical thinking process, a preconditioned substitute for rational thought. If repeated often enough without challenge, these cliches gradually seep their way into the subconscious where they can command the emotions to their uncritical defense. For this reason, let us be sure that we clearly understand the basic flaws and fallacies that lurk behind the most typical cliches. It is our last best hope for peace. This is without a doubt the most universal cliche used to defend the United Nations. It takes many forms and subtle variations. It is safe to say that over 90% of all pro-UN speeches, magazine articles, and books hinge around this central theme. Unless we can spot the fallacies, we are completely at their mercy. The first fallacy is clear to anyone who has taken the trouble to follow the UN's action to bring about peace in Katanga. There are two kinds of peace. One is the kind that most of us think about when we hear the word, a peace that includes freedom. But if we define peace as merely the absence of war, then we could be talking about the peace that reigns in a communist slave labor camp. One thing is certain, the wretched souls imprisoned there are not at war. But would they call it peace? Alfredo Cardinal Ottavini expressed it well when he said, quote, "While Cain can still massacre Abel without anyone's noticing it, while entire nations are still held in slavery without anyone coming to the assistance of the oppressed, while years after the Hungarian revolt, the bloodletting still continues with the condemnation to death of students, peasants, and workers guilty of having loved a freedom that was stamped out by foreign tanks, without the world showing any horror at so great a crime. While such things persist, it is impossible to speak of a true peace, but only of a consent to a massacre." The second fallacy, however, is far more important. How on earth can an organization promote peace in the world when strategically entrenched within it is the most aggressive peace-destroying force the world has ever seen? International communism recognizes only the principle of brute force. When it was suggested at Tehran that the Pope request Hitler to guarantee the humane treatment of prisoners, Stalin remarked, "The Pope? How many divisions does he have?" Having the communists sitting in key spots within a so-called peacekeeping force is as logical as having members of the mafia on a police commissioner's board to prevent crime in Chicago. It is curious to observe how so many people apparently grasp this fact when applied to Red China, but fail to apply the same principle to Soviet Russia. They become excited over the possibility of admitting Red China to the United Nations, but never advocate throwing out the other communist countries. Former UN Ambassador Henry Cabot Lodge, as a typical example, once argued that Red China should not be admitted to the United Nations because the organization, quote, "is not a place where the virtuous and the criminal sit side by side." Yet we do sit side by side with the Soviets. According to this kind of logic, either the US is criminal or the Soviets are virtuous. Obviously, there can be no peace without order. There can be no order without justice, and there can be no justice when the criminal directs the police and judges his own trial. This is why, since the UN was created supposedly to prevent the rise of another world-grasping tyrannical power like Nazism, the equally ruthless and bloodthirsty regime of international communism has spread at a fantastic pace and has massacred and enslaved more people, broken more families, destroyed more homes, and conquered more land than Hitler ever came close to doing. If that is our last best hope for peace, we have lost all semblance of sanity. The UN must be hurting the communists, otherwise why would they rant and rave against it so much? The answer to that one is very simple. They do not oppose the UN at all. The only time they appear to is when it is a public performance before news cameras or at press conferences. These dramatic performances are obviously for propaganda purposes only. What the communists really think about the United Nations can be seen quite clearly from the glowing praise it receives in the communist press, which is aimed not at the general public, but at the party members themselves. But to answer the question of why they pretend to oppose the UN, one of the best explanations was provided, unintentionally no doubt, by Adlai Stevenson when he said, quote, "The Soviet Union has attacked the UN, has refused to pay its share of the Congo expenses and has laid siege to the institution of the Secretary General. Thus, as often before, the Soviets have pressed their attack at a moment when the UN community seems most divided against itself. But once again, that very attack makes the members realize more keenly that they are members of a community and causes them to draw together. At least while we're talking, we're not shooting. This is really an extension of the peace cliché, but it is so widely used that it deserves special consideration. In addition to all the observations previously made, it should be further noted that this argument presumes an either-or situation that does not exist. It assumes that we either talk with the communists or shoot them. Nothing could be further from reality. The best way to get yourself into a barroom brawl with a bunch of thugs is to go into the bar and start talking with them. The smart thing to do is to stay out and mind your own business. Very good point. The theory that as long as nations are talking over their problems, there will not be a war sounds fine. Unfortunately, it does not work that way. Americans surely remember what happened on a December morning some years ago while Emperor Hirohito's envoys were in Washington talking. The UN is merely doing between nations what we did so successfully with our 13 colonies. This, in essence, is the plea for federalism, and is based on the idea that the mere act of joining separate political units together into a larger federal entity will somehow prevent those units from waging war with each other. The success of our own federal system is most often cited as proof that this theory is valid, but such an evaluation is a shallow one. First of all, the American Civil War, one of the most bloody in all history, illustrates conclusively that the mere federation of governments, even those culturally similar, as in America, does not automatically prevent war between them. Secondly, we find that true peace quite easily exists between nations which are not federated. As a matter of fact, members of the British Commonwealth of Nations seemed to get along far more peacefully after the political bonds between them had been relaxed. In other words, true peace has absolutely nothing to do with whether separate political units are joined together, except perhaps that such a union may create a common military defense sufficiently impressive to deter an aggressive attack. But that is peace between the Union and outside powers. It has little effect on peace between the units themselves, which is the substance of the UN argument. Peace is the natural result of relationships between groups and cultures which are mutually satisfactory to both sides. These relationships are found with equal ease within or across federal lines. As a matter of fact, they are the same relationships that promote peaceful conditions within the community, the neighborhood, the family itself. What are they? Just stop and think for a moment. If you were marooned on an island with two other people, what relationships between you would be mutually satisfactory enough to prevent you from resorting to violence in your relationships? Or, to put it another way around, what would cause you to break the peace and raise your hand against your partners? Obviously, if one or both of the others attempted to seize your food and shelter, you would fight. Their reaction to similar efforts on your part would be the same. If they attempted to take away your freedom, to dictate how you should conduct your affairs, or tell you what moral and ethical standards you must follow, likewise you would fight. And if they constantly ridiculed your attire, your manners, and your speech, in time you might be sparked into a brawl. The best way to keep the peace on that island is for each one to mind his own business, to respect each other's right to his own property, to respect the other fellow's right to be different, even to act in a way that seems foolish or improper if he wishes, to have compassion for each other's troubles and hardships, but to force each other to do nothing. And to make sure that the others hold to their end of the bargain, each should keep physically strong enough to make any violation of this code unprofitable. Now, suppose these three got together and decided to form a political union, to federate, as it were. Would this really change anything? Suppose they declared themselves to be the United Persons, and wrote a charter and held daily meetings and passed resolutions. What then? These superficial ceremonies might be fun for a while, but the minute two of them outvoted the other and started legally to take his food and shelter, limit his freedom, or force him to accept an unwanted standard of moral conduct, they would be right back where they all began. Charter or no charter, they would fight. Is it really different between nations? Not at all. The same simple code of conduct applies in all human relationships, large or small, regardless of the size. Be it international or three men on an island, the basic unit is still the human personality. Ignore this fact, and any plan is doomed to failure. When the 13 colonies formed our federal union, they had two very important factors in their favor, neither of which are present in the United Nations. First, the colonies themselves were all of a similar cultural background. They enjoyed similar legal systems, they spoke the same language, and they shared similar religious beliefs. They had much in common. The second advantage, and the most important of the two, was that they formed their union under a constitution which was designed to prevent any of them, or a majority of them, from forcefully intervening in the affairs of the others. The original federal government was authorized to provide mutual defense, run a post office, and that was about all. As previously mentioned, however, even though we had these powerful forces working in our favor, full-scale war did break out at one tragic point in our history. The peace that followed, of course, was no peace at all, but was only the smoldering resentment and hatred that falls in the wake of any armed conflict. Fortunately, the common ties between North and South, the cultural similarities, and the common heritage have proved through the intervening years to overbalance the differences, and with the gradual passing away of the generation that carried the battle scars, the Union has healed. In the United Nations, there are precious few common bonds that could help overcome the clash of cross purposes that inevitably must arise between groups with such divergent ethnic, linguistic, legal, religious, cultural, and political environments. To add fuel to the fire, the UN concept is one of unlimited governmental power to impose by force a monolithic set of values and conduct on all groups and individuals whether they like it or not. Far from ensuring peace, such conditions can only enhance the chances of war. There is nothing wrong with the basic argument for a world society or a world union of nations, but not just any world federation will do. Otherwise, we should have let Hitler conquer us all. That is precisely what he was working toward. In order to work, such a one-world system will have to be based on the same rules of conduct, the same principles of limited government that we have just outlined. The system will have to be one which, instead of using the police-backed force of government decree to cram every human being into a single mold, will set out systematically to reduce even the existing government restrictions on man's freedom. When speaking about the United Nations, however, we are not talking about a United Nations or some United Nations or the idea of a United Nations. We are talking about the existing United Nations, and any thought that the existing United Nations will bring peace and happiness to this earth is merely the temporary triumph of hope over reason. We don't want to turn back the clock to a period of isolationism, do we? This is two cliches wrapped into one. The first assumes that all change is progress. In other words, today is better than yesterday and tomorrow will be better than today. That is implied in the phrase turn back the clock. In the realm of material things, inventions, gadgets, consumer products, etc., this is often a valid observation. But when it comes to human relationships, there can be no such presumption. Change may or may not be an improvement. Each case must stand on its own merits. The word isolationism is the basis of the second cliché. It has become a scare word to intimidate all critics of the United Nations. The so-called isolationism of the United States in past years is basically a myth. We have never been totally isolated from the world, either in diplomatic affairs or commerce. On the contrary, American influence and trade have been felt in every region of the globe. Private groups and individuals spread knowledge, business, prosperity, religion, and goodwill throughout every foreign continent. It was not necessary then for America to give up her independence to have contact with other countries. It is not necessary now. Yet, in the summer of 1963, a Gallup poll asked the following question: would it be better for the US to keep independent in world affairs or to work closely with other nations? How many people saw through the intellectual deception of the presumption that in order to work closely and with other nations, we cannot stay independent? Apparently not many, for 80% of the answers favoured working closely with other nations. With the use of such cliches and loaded phrases, many Americans have been led to believe that this country is so strong it can defend and subsidize half the world, while at the same time believing it is so weak and interdependent that it cannot survive without pooling its sovereignty and independence with those it must subsidize. If wanting no part of this kind of logic is isolationism, then it is indeed time that it was brought back into vogue. The UN provides a valuable vehicle for contact between nations. This may be true, but is it necessary? What is wrong with the traditional method of maintaining contact between nations through the use of ambassadors, envoys, and a diplomatic corps? The United States has such contacts in all the major capitals of the world. Why not use them? In fact, the traditional approach is far more likely to produce results than the debating arena of the United Nations. Consider what would happen if every time a small spat arose between a husband and wife, they called the entire neighborhood together and took turns airing their complaints in front of the whole group. Gone would be any chance of reconciliation. Instead of working out their problems, the ugly necessity of saving face, proving points, and winning popular sympathy would likely drive them further apart. Likewise, public debates in the UN intensify international tensions. By shouting their grievances at each other, countries allow their differences to assume a magnitude they would otherwise never have reached. Quiet diplomacy is always more conducive to progress than diplomacy on the stage. Nationalism fosters jealousy, suspicion, and hatred of other countries, which in turn leads to war. Here again, we are dealing with a problem of semantics and false logic. If we merely substitute the word independence for nationalism, this cliché begins to fall apart right away. We should be desirous of not having men hate each other because they live in another country. But what kind of logic assumes that loving one's own country means hating all others? Why can't we be proud of America as an independent nation and also have a feeling of brotherhood and respect for other peoples around the world? As a matter of fact, haven't Americans done just that for the past 200 years? What country has poured out more treasure to other lands, opened its doors to more immigrants, and sent more of its citizens as missionaries, teachers, and doctors than ours? Are we now to believe that love of our own country will cause us to hate the peoples of other lands? In order for a man to be a good neighbor within his community, he does not have to love other men's wives and children as he does his own. We must support the UN because it is working to eliminate the roots of war: ignorance, poverty, hunger, and disease. The fallacy in this argument is the assertion that ignorance, poverty, hunger, and disease are the roots of war. Some of the bloodiest wars of history have been fought between nations that were highly educated, affluent, and healthy. What country hovering on the brink of poverty and disease ever started a major war? How could it? To wage war requires armaments and large armies, hardly the products of destitute states. As for the thought that low educational standards and lack of international understanding, whatever that means, are the cause of war, consider the fact that Germany and England were enemies in 2 world wars. Yet both have extremely high educational standards, and it would be difficult to name 2 nations that had a more thorough understanding of each other. There is no challenging the fact that the United Nations, through its specialized agencies, has done some good, perhaps much good, in many areas. Food and clothing have been distributed to the needy, medical care has been provided for the sick and the lame. But for each child so fed and clothed, for each person relieved of suffering, the UN system is destined to condemn 100 who can never be reached. when the United States stood for individual freedom rather than government subsidies, it spearheaded a century of life-saving and relief from famine and pestilence that far exceeded anything UNICEF or WHO can ever approach. What America gave was not primarily food, clothing, and medicine, although it did give these things in large quantities, but rather it provided an example of what could be achieved through a system of economic freedom. It is impossible to uplift the masses of the world through a redistribution of the existing wealth. If every man, woman, and child in America gave everything he had but the shirt on his back, the poverty-stricken peoples of the world would hardly notice a change in their misery. There are so many of them and so few of us. But by providing the example, the encouragement, and the assistance for these people to follow in our footsteps, they can build their own economies to the point where real and sustained progress is possible. The only way that the needy of the world will ever be helped, other than with sporadic and temporary measures, is for governments to abandon the futile, paternalistic programs which are draining the economies of those countries to the point where they cannot flourish. Only when free enterprise is introduced will the full productive capacity of these areas be released so that their people will no longer have to worry about nutrition or health. The cause of war is simply the use of force to require a nation or group to accept the dictates of another nation or group. Since the United Nations is committed to the use of force, quote, if necessary in the last resort, as the cornerstone of its approach to world problems, it can never get at the roots of war. Instead of scrapping the whole thing, we should reorganize the UN and use it to our own advantage. The proponents of this idea never explain how we should go about revising an organization in which we have only one vote against 112 who do not want to revise it. This approach may be less controversial than the get us out school of thought, but it simply will not work. With what would we replace the UN? This is perhaps the greatest cliché of the lot. The implication that it has to be replaced at all is very seldom challenged, even by critics of the UN who consequently begin to search for a NATO or a Western alliance or organization of free states. This would be like a patient who, upon being told by his doctor that he has a cancer that must be removed, replies, "Just a minute, doctor, what would you replace it with?" When something is evil and dangerous, it is not necessary to find a replacement before getting rid of it. But, in the case of the UN, this is not an entirely superfluous idea. True, we must get out of the UN whether we replace it with anything or not. But, to be perfectly realistic, when the United States does withdraw, the UN will be replaced, but not by NATO. When the UN finally topples, it will be the result of a groundswell of renewed patriotism and a rebirth of the American spirit of victory over tyranny, a return to the traditional American principles which made this country great. Instead of looking to the rest of the world for collective security, we will rely on our own strength and vigilance. Instead of trying to finance the expansion of socialism in every country around the world, we will encourage, by example, the spread of free enterprise capitalism. Instead of coddling agents of our sworn enemy within the top echelons of our own government, we will replace them and their sympathizers with men who are loyal only to the United States. And unless this very important first step is taken, we are not going to even come close to getting out of the UN. Until we disconnect this end of the Washington-Moscow axis, our government will continue to support and promote the UN as it has from the very beginning. Instead of coexistence with the evil thing called communism, we will direct our energies toward ultimate victory. Instead of continuing to build a welfare socialist system here at home, we will move once again in the direction of reducing government restrictions on our daily lives and thus in the direction of increasing personal freedom. Instead of trying to buy friendship around the world, we will offer the sincere qualities of mutual respect and goodwill. American investment abroad by private citizens and business enterprises will create far more prosperity in foreign lands than foreign aid ever could. And the commerce that springs from such investment will do more to bring our peoples together than all the Peace Corps and other government programs put together. In short, the United Nations will be replaced with freedom. Freedom for all people, everywhere, to live as they please with no super government directing them. Freedom to succeed or to fail and to try again. Freedom to make mistakes and even to be foolish in the eyes of others. Americans will once again be free to work where they please, employ whom they please, buy and sell what they please, and, in an infinite number of ways, do what they please, with only one government restriction upon them, that they not interfere with anyone else's access to the same freedom. This is the meaning of a republic, a limited government. This is what we Americans once had until the socialists, communists, and other collectivists turned back the clock to the ideas that dominated the political systems of the Dark Ages. Many Americans today, thinking that collectivist ideas are new, argue that we must place more and more power into the hands of the federal government so that it will be strong enough to cope with the challenges of the modern world. But, as Thomas Jefferson stated in 1801, I know indeed that some honest men fear that a republican government cannot be strong, that this government is not strong enough. But would the honest patriot, in the full tide of a successful experiment, abandon a government which has so far kept us free and firm, on the theoretic and visionary fear that this government, the world's best hope, may by possibility want energy to preserve itself? I trust not. I believe this, on the contrary, the strongest government on earth. As for peace in the world, until all nations follow the concept of limited government, it is unlikely that universal peace will ever be attained. Unlimited, power-grasping governments will always resort to force if they think they can get away with it. But there is no doubt that there can be peace for America. As long as we maintain our military preparedness, the world's petty despots will leave us alone. To make sure that we do not get caught up in the middle of the endless squabbles between the countries of Europe, Asia, and Africa, we must put an end to the insane practice of trying to entwine our economic and political affairs with those of the rest of the world. Let us, then, move the clock forward to that point where we were when this great nation was infused with the only really new political concept the world has seen in thousands of years. Let us throw off these old world ideas and heed the sage advice of that true modernist, George Washington, who told his countrymen, quote, "Observe good faith and justice toward all nations. Cultivate peace and harmony with all. Religion and morality enjoin this conduct, and can it be that good policy does not equally enjoin it? Against the insidious wiles of foreign influence, I conjure you to believe me, fellow citizens, the jealousy of a free people ought to be constantly awake, since history and experience prove that foreign influence is one of the most baneful foes of republican government. If we remain one people under an efficient government, the period is not far off when we may defy material injury from external annoyance, when we may take such an attitude as will cause the neutrality we may at any time resolve upon to be scrupulously respected. When belligerent nations, under the impossibility of making acquisitions on us, will not likely hazard giving us provocation. When we may choose peace or war as our interest, guided by justice, shall counsel. Why forego the advantages of so peculiar a situation? Why, by interweaving our destiny with that of any part of Europe, entangle our peace and prosperity in the toils of European ambition, rivalship, interest, humor, or caprice? The next time you hear someone speak lightly about sovereignty or national independence, remember that this was the one single accomplishment of the American Revolution. Our present involvement in the United Nations has put us right back where the shooting began in 1775. The Declaration of Independence states, quote, "When in the course of human events it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bonds which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitles them, A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. It then lists the causes. It is stunning that this bill of grievances and complaints can be justly applied to the present encroaching tyranny of the United Nations and, to some extent, our own expanding federal government. It speaks of a multitude of new offices and swarms of officers to harass our people and eat out their substance. It complains about being subject to a jurisdiction foreign to our Constitution and unacknowledged by our laws. It deplores transporting large armies of foreign mercenaries to complete the works of death, desolation, and tyranny already begun with circumstances of cruelty and perfidy scarcely paralleled in the most barbarous ages and totally unworthy of the head of a civilized nation. The men who put their signatures to the bottom of the Declaration of Independence were signing their own potential death warrants. Most of them were prosperous and comfortably situated, with every reason to go along with the existing bureaucracy. Besides, what chance did inexperienced farmers have against the British Army, at that time the most invincible fighting force in the whole world? If the colonies had been overpowered, as it appeared more likely they would be, these men who signed the Declaration would have all been hanged or shot as traitors. Yet, without hesitation, they stood up for what they believed to be right and declared, quote, "And for the support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor." In signing the Declaration of Independence, John Adams turned to his colleagues and spoke these words, quote, "If it be the pleasure of heaven that my country shall require the poor offering of my life, the victim shall be ready. But while I do live, let me have a country, or at least the hope of a country, and that a free country. But whatever may be our fate, be assured, this declaration will stand. It may cost treasure, and it may cost blood, but it will stand, and it will richly compensate for both. And live or die, survive or perish, I am for the declaration. It is my living sentiment, and, by the blessing of God, it shall be my dying sentiment. Independence now, and independence forever." Can it be that modern Americans are not equal to their ancestors? Are we not willing, if necessary, to make sacrifices in the cause of freedom? Is it more important to enjoy the temporary comforts of the good life, the security of a non-controversial social status, than to pass on to our children the cherished liberty we ourselves inherited? As Patrick Henry would have replied, "Forbid it, Almighty God." As you read these final words, you must come to a decision as to your own reply to these questions. Each man and woman will soon be called upon for his answer. The rapidity of world events will no longer permit us to remain aloof and unaffected by them. Disinterest will no longer purchase a ticket for escape. Tyranny demands unqualified allegiance. We are either for it or against it. There is no middle ground. Which will it be? America. And that was G. Edward Griffin's The Fearful Master, a second look at the United Nations. Which will it be, indeed? Incredible. I was getting feelings of patriotic duty, and not because I'm American or loyal to America as a country, but it's freedom. It's the concept and the idea of freedom. What is it? And do we have it? And I think a lot of people think they've got it, but what they've got is like a fake version. It's like a plastic synthetic version where you're told you're free because you can drink alcohol and go shopping and watch films at the cinema and go on holiday for a couple of weeks a year. But you're not free to disentangle yourself from the tax system, for example. You're not free to withdraw your consent to being governed by a bunch of criminals, psychopathic, murderous warmongers, right? You're not free, in many cases, to just go and start a business. Just open the doors and start trading, right? There's so much regulation and red tape and bureaucracy and permits and law, man-made law, stifling free enterprise, stifling entrepreneurism, stifling our ability to offer goods and services to each other to make our communities better for everyone who lives there. There's a stranglehold over our minds that we are all forced to go through when we endure 15,000 hours of government indoctrination schooling. And it takes a long time to unpick that and unravel the restraints that are placed upon us during that time, to reconnect with our potential and our true creative nature, to unearth and get back to that place where we have ideas and we take joy in solving problems and helping each other and helping other people and adding value to the lives of the people around us whom we love and who we live among. We're really handicapped, and there's no way to withdraw your consent from that system and to say, no, thank you, I'm going to go over here and do my thing with my family, right? It's very hard. It's possible. It's very hard. And I don't think they're going to make it easier. So that ending paragraph there was incredibly powerful. What a writer. To be writing this back in the 60s as well. As I was going through it, he really points the finger at socialism and international communism. At this time, he wasn't aware of the internationalists and the globalists as described by Carol Quigley in Tragedy and Hope and Anglo-American Establishment. I don't think that those books were out there. I don't think he had access to the awareness of, I think he was nescient, let's say. So nescient, if you don't know, if you are nescient, it means you don't have access to the information. It doesn't exist for you. Versus if you are ignorant, it means the information is there, but you're ignoring it. Hence, you are ignorant. I think in his case, he was nescient. There was no Tragedy and Hope for him to read. They probably wouldn't give Ed Griffin access to the CFR archives like they did Professor Quigley, right? But even so, he recognized what was going on. And even though he pointed the finger and laid it at the feet of the Communist International, not knowing that they had a group behind them funding and steering them, he still correctly identified what was under attack, and that's freedom. That's the right to self-determination. That's the God-given natural state of this place. And unfortunately, we've been born into systems that are incredibly oppressive, and it's a soft slavery. It's slavery light. It's not the overt tie you to a tree and whip your back because you stole a piece of bread slavery. But it's the kind of soft slavery where you get your life restricted and controlled by people you'll never meet, who don't know you, your name, or care about you. And there's very little you can do about it. You get put on a hamster wheel and told to run. And you might garner some, if you run fast enough, you'll garner some material comforts along the way. Maybe you can buy yourself a nice sports car or a big house. Maybe you can maybe you'll even get yourself, I don't know, like a yacht or something like that. But what do you have to sacrifice to make that happen? What drudgery? What meaningless, pointless tasks do you have to engage in? What struggles and battles do you have to overcome in the workplace to make that happen, right? How many people are genuinely adding value to the lives of others and getting to those levels of success in the world? You don't. You get to those levels of success by serving the blob and the bureaucratic machinery that has been erected by the socialist, communist, Fabian types, who Ed Griffin was correctly pointing at and saying, look what they're doing. All these tiny, remember the chapter where he describes the tiny silken threads that the Lilliputians managed to use to restrain the giant Gulliver when he washed up on their beach, right? That's what all this bureaucratic machinery does to us, to our lives. It's restraining and containing our innate potential, which is massive, which is giant, which is infinite, pretty much. Probably not infinite because we're all going to die at some point, but it's immense, as Richard Grove says. Your potential is immense, and that is what they work so hard, so diligently, and plan so long term to get rid of, to squeeze it out, to atrophy it, to weaken it, and to hide it from you so you don't know about that. All this bureaucratic machinery, box filling, form filling, all this memorization of trivia to regurgitate it on a test and be given a letter and a magical piece of paper that gets you into a university to memorize more trivia, to regurgitate it on a test to get another magic piece of paper that may or may not get you a job. And then you're on the hamster wheel. Good for you. Now you're on the hamster wheel, and hopefully you die on the hamster wheel, because if you don't, if you get to your retirement age, the government's going to have to pay you back some of that money that you paid into the system, right? So they're banking on you just collapsing on the hamster wheel one day. It's a not a particularly great system. Do you know what I mean? And G. Edward Griffin saw it coming, and he wrote this book, and he tried to warn people, and we are keeping that message alive by participating in this reading on this channel. And, he's communicated that message to us. And now the onus is on us to communicate it out to other people. And we've got the flame. We've got that fire, that message now, that light. And we got to pass it on to other people and tell other people about it, right? And keep it alive. So there's a really powerful closing chapter. It certainly roused me and got me very fired up and very passionate about what I do and what we do and the kind of circles we swim in and the information that we take in and the efforts that we put in service of truth and freedom and human emancipation from the ridiculous soft slavery that we've been born into and has been constructed around us. We see it. We see it, even though they're pissing on us and telling us it's raining, but I can smell it. So, how did you guys react or respond to that last chapter? Hopefully you enjoyed it. Turbs gave us some fire emojis over on Rumble. ESP says nescient is a great word. It's like humanity is going through a revaluation or a revelation, maybe. I'm just going to type the word nescient into the chat there because it's a bit of a strange spelling. And I'm just going to double check that I got it right because I'm doubting myself. I think it's Nescient. Yeah, that's it. Nescient. Lacking in knowledge, information, or skill. It says on dictionary.com that that it means ignorant, but it doesn't. It's a slightly different meaning to ignorant, right? It actually has, like I explained. If the information is not there and there's no way you could have known it, then you're nescient. If the information is there and you just chose not to look at it or take it in, then you're ignoring the information, therefore you are ignorant. Okay? I mean, it's in the word. Easy one to remember, that definition. Okay, let's have a look at YouTube. So Celine Lyon says, you are with us or against us. Remember this famous false dichotomy. I'm not sure which one exactly, but it sounds very familiar. I think that happens a lot, right? Especially when they need to recruit a bunch of willing dupes to go along to war somewhere. It's like, well, you're with us or you're against us. It's like the wearing the white feather in the cap. If your husband or somebody or some man in your family had refused to go to war, right? I don't know if that was a Bernaysian idea, but that was done to shame the men who were unwilling to go and murder strangers. Page 229, Frank says, good passage on nationalism there. Yeah, that whole last chapter, every single section of that, each one of those would make a good short clip, I think. So, and Fuego says, such a great chapter to address the logically fallacious foregone conclusions of the Fabians. Yeah, well said. Yeah, and I love the way that he was bringing it back to the level of the family and the community and the household, you know, or the strangers on the island. Okay, so you've got 3 strangers on an island. How do you cope? How do you deal with that? Well, you respect each other's privacy. You try and find ways to help each other out and make fair exchange. Does it benefit you to have a united persons? No, because then you got 2 voting against 1. What's that? That's democracy. Oh, okay. Mob rule. You know, 51% wants to take the stuff of the 49%. Oh, well, that's democracy because it's the majority who voted for it, right? So the 51% is going to take all the 49% stuff now. That's democracy. That's the system you're in. So using those fantastic, very, like, it's kind of as above, so below type of analogy, isn't it? So excellent work in closing that chapter. Frank says, absolutely splendid. Gwen says, amazing conclusion. And Sharmanicus says, bloody good book. I'm defo ordering a copy soon. Yes, do that. Definitely. Grab it. Grab a copy. Most of the copies you'll find will probably be kind of messed up, well-thumbed paperback copies. I got very lucky, managed to get this one on eBay, and it was unread. But there are copies of this available. It is not impossible to find and worth preserving and having a copy in your library for sure. And Fuego says, we are not allowed to solve our own problems. Patent confiscations under the auspice of national security is a case in point. Yeah, you can't come up with a new car engine that runs on water. We need to confiscate that technology from you. We need you reliant upon the monopolies and the cartels that pay for us. The pharma cartels and the oil cartels. Exactly. Shamanarchist says, it's like the spider's web. Every time the fly caught in the web frees himself from one strand, he finds himself caught on another strand. Yeah, I agree with you there. That's exactly what it's like. And the more that you wriggle and fight and squirm, the more alert the spider becomes of you, right? That's how the web works. You send these vibrations along the web, the strands, and the spider becomes alert and then starts looking at you and then starts sizing you up and thinking, oh, do you look tasty? And then, oh, do you have the strength to escape or not? Maybe I'll come over there and wrap a little cocoon of silken web around you and save you for lunch, eat you for lunch. That's kind of what it's like. Celine Lyon says, looking at the whole world as a whole, the drift for many decades has been not towards anarchy, but towards voluntary slavery. And that is a George Orwell quote. Thank you. I hadn't read that one before, so I appreciate that. Is that from a particular book or speech or maybe his memoirs or diaries or something? And then another quote, none are more enslaved than those who falsely believe they are free. That is Wolfgang von Goethe. The best slave is the one who thinks he is free. Yeah, exactly. And they've tried different systems over the years. Which one works the best? And exactly that is the best one is the one where you have no idea and you think it's the cave, it's the cave shadows on the cave wall in Plato's cave analogy. And you think you're looking at reality and you think it makes sense and it's just and it's fair and it's right and it's good and it evolved naturally and it's just the way it is because no one's got it under control. Nobody's designed it. We've just ended up here organically without any plan because it's all just evolution. It's just the evolution of civilizations and societies. And we are at the peak, the precipice, the pinnacle. And we've never had it so good because we've got iPhones and because we've got fairly reliable, hot water and central heating and electricity. But I really love the fact that Ed Griffin made that point there, where he's like, okay, yeah, we've got gadgets and gizmos and material goods, but how about those human qualities? How about things like love, kindness, compassion, creativity, decency, honor, virtue, loyalty? What about these? What condition are they in compared to in the past? I'd say they're in the toilet or at least circling the drain. for the most part, for most people out there. But again, I'm a bit of a hermit, and I'm quite introverted and isolated in many ways. So I don't know. I could be wrong. Maybe everyone's out there being super kind and decent to each other all the time, and it's really going well. But that's a really good point. I was in the pub last week, and I was chatting to an older fella there, and he was like, "Things are much better now. Things are great nowadays. They've never been as good as they are now." All right, but by what metric? Okay, you've got more toys and gadgets and gizmos. If that's your metric, yeah, things are better now. You didn't have as many gadgets and gizmos in the past. But is the quality of are you inspired every day by the people around you that you talk to? Are you learning and growing as an individual, gaining skills, learning how to add value to the lives of others? Are you learning how to navigate complex situations, how to inspire and lift up the spirits and the hearts of others? Are you like, there's such a deep spiritual dimension of possibilities that I think a lot of people are cut off from by this, like, oh, well, we got gadgets and gizmos and the material stuff's good, therefore things are better. So I really like the fact that Ed made that point. Are we better off as humans in our relationships? It's one question to ponder for sure. Frank Lennon says, Tragedy and Hope, chapter 11, lots about monopolies and cartels. Frank, is that the chapter that you're speaking on? This might be a good moment to plug the the Cutting Through the Matrix book club, run by Melissa and a bunch of other people. We have a book club. Melissa is Alan Watt's widow, and Frank Lennon says yes. So this coming, let's see, what day is it? Is it the 30th that you're doing that? Is it Friday the 30th? I'm saying that off the top of my head. Let's see if I can find a little graphic that I could share with people. That would be more useful, wouldn't it? Than me failing to get my details right. Here we go. I'm going to grab that, copy it. Bear with me a sec. Oh no, I didn't mean to do that. I'm not sure the best way to get this up on screen for you. Oh, I know what I could do. But basically, on the 31st, Frank is hosting the Cutting Through the Matrix book club. And he's going to be kicking off the talk, because it is a talk. It's more like a group discussion about, there you are, a group discussion about chapter 11 of Tragedy and Hope. Now, we've been working through this book chapter at a time, and taking turns to kick off the discussion and to talk about it. I did the chapter on international communism and socialism, which was very good fun. Blocking my face now. Okay, I'm moving myself over there. And this Saturday, the 31st, Frank is kicking off the discussion. So if you're interested, you can hop into that chat. It's on Telegram, and it's a really good bunch of people. It's a very active chat, very diligent researchers with a variety of opinions, and we make effort to include everybody, make sure nobody's excluded, and all topics are free for discussion with respect, with decency, with open-mindedness, with proper curiosity. You got to bring your curiosity and be willing to learn, be willing to humble yourself to get things wrong and be corrected if you happen to be mistaken or something. So I would, and I think I've been enjoying these sessions very much, and they do get posted to Melissa's YouTube channels. Sorry, YouTube, BitChute, Rumble. So if you want to follow her work and the work that she puts up, it is CTTM Alan Watt, WATT. CTTM Alan Watt. And see if I can grab an invite link for the book club. I'm in there most of the time, most days actually. And the book club is now being posted on the YouTube chat. We could pop it in Rumble. And we could pop it in Odyssey as well. Why not? Do you know what? I can even pop it on Entropy. I always forget to talk about entropy. My bad. But yeah, that's going to be really good fun. And going to be an edifying conversation. I think we're all going to have a very good time. And Frank is kicking that off. And if you notice, those of you on YouTube, I'm sure you've seen Frank, diligent researcher and stalwart companion to Hayes Reviews. And it's been really good to get to know Frank and have him in the group. So thank you for supporting the channel so much, Frank. I appreciate it. And I'm glad to know you. And I'm sure you're going to do an excellent job kicking off that discussion and giving us your thoughts and insights and experiences reading the chapter, which is about monopolies and cartels. So if anybody wants to learn more about that topic from Professor Carol Quigley, who is, was it Bill Clinton's mentor and official historian of the Council on Foreign Relations, then click that link, get yourself over onto Telegram, check out the group and have a good time interacting with the excellent people who are in there. They're really good people. Melissa pops by from time to time and reviews the chat, but she's working very hard getting Alan Watts material out there, but also her own interviews and podcasts. And that reminds me, I should also plug, I'll be talking to her early in September. I'm gonna have a video call with her to discuss Animal Farm by George Orwell, which I've never read. Can you believe that? But it's true. Sweet. So where are we at time-wise? We've got a little bit of time left. So I thought now that we finished that, we could do something slightly different. And I've mentioned this in previous videos on this series, but I thought we could dive into this book, which is You and the United Nations. Okay? So, if you remember the whole chapter on psychological warfare, the whole part of the book on psychological warfare, he talked about how young people, because the communist movement, it had to get in the minds of the young and turn them against their families and turn them against their nations. And Ed Griffin spoke on how the Korean soldiers were the first, the American soldiers who fought in the Korean War were the first generation of American soldiers who were demoralized and demotivated and had not been indoctrinated with a strong sense of patriotism and duty to nation and country and Christianity and all the things that America had to go through to get to where it was at that point. They were like the first generation of soldiers who went through this global citizen, United Nations kind of propaganda and training. And this is one of the books that Ed Griffin mentions and quotes from in the start of Fearful Master. And so I went online, and as I always do when I see a title of a book that sounds interesting, I type it in and quickly have a look to see if I can grab a copy. And I did get a copy. And this is really exciting for me because it's pretty wacky. And we'll just have so this is kind of like we'll just go through this now. We shouldn't take too long. It's a children's book. So it's a bit lighter, a bit easier to read. This is a little bedtime story for you. I don't know if it's bedtime where you are, but we're coming up. It's bedtime for me soon. So we'll have a little bedtime story. So this is You and the United Nations by Lois Fisher. I'll just take the dust jacket off so you can see the cover properly there. You and the United Nations, written and illustrated by Lois Fisher. And it's a really fragile book because you can see here it's from 1947. So hot off the end of World War II, they start pumping out the United Nations propaganda, selling it for 60 cents. And there's a few quotes on the inside flap here, which I'll read. It is one of the most outstanding presentations of the United Nations that I have been privileged to see. I hope that it will have an enormous circulation both in this country and abroad. That is Willard Johnson, the Vice President of the National Conference of Christians and Jews Incorporated. So there's another quote here, which is, "For many years we have sought a brief, easily read book showing in graphic form the necessity and feasibility of world Order. In You and the United Nations, we have found just such a book. And that is Dr. Henry A. Atkinson, General Secretary of the World Alliance for International Friendship Through the Churches, which sounds like a bit of an ecumenist movement. And then the last, but it's interesting that he mentions feasibility of world order. Could that be a new world order by any chance, Mr. Atkinson? And then the last quote down here is, the churches will find this little book to be a great help in teaching the lessons of world peace to the younger generation and to adults as well. And that's Ralph Sockman, the president of Church Peace Union. So it sounds like this was written to be taught in churches, or at least given and spread out in churches. All the quotes on the front inside flap are people involved in religious organizations, it seems. We haven't got anything. The back of the book is the same as the front, and there's nothing on the inside flap here. So we don't know anything about Lois Fisher. But let's get him. The author wishes to thank Louise Leonard Wright, who inspired this book. That fits on the page, doesn't it? I'll zoom out a little bit more. So You and the United Nations, written and illustrated by Lois Fisher. Children's Press Incorporated, Chicago. Got a little globe here. So they're using the globe in this one. Penguin on the bottom, seal on the top. Children's Press expresses gratitude to Mrs. Harrison Thomas, Educational Director, American Association for the United Nations Incorporated, for her help in editing this book. So just funny that they mention this incorporated, right? Because it is just a corporation. It's just a privately owned corporation. People kind of forget that. But Alan Watt mentions it quite a lot in his talks, that the United Nations is just a privately run corporation, privately owned corporation, as are many institutions and groups, governments, countries. Like, you'd be surprised. I think mostly all of these things are corporations. But anyway, this is dedicated to JF and RE. Copyright 1947, printed in the USA. Okay, so if you move back far enough, you get perspective. We got a bunch of people standing around in a art gallery, and some of these pieces of art on the wall. I'll zoom in a bit so you can see some of those. This one looks like an eye and a Saturn. This is a man upside down, a man on his head. This looks like a lady who's lying down flat on her back. There's a little horned entity over here in this picture. And these two, there's a boy and a girl, and they're running to the left, and they're looking back over their shoulder through a doorway at this tiny picture in another room. And they're carrying pieces of paper which say contemporary art. And so I guess the idea here is you got to step back, move far away, and look at something from a distance, right? And here's the boy and the girl again, and they're saying, it looks like a fight. And what's the picture that they're looking at? This picture here, the world in action. And this is three sort of angry-looking men with cross eyes sitting around a table with microphones. Look like they're banging their fist on the table. They're frowning. They're baring their teeth or gnashing their teeth. And one guy's hollering. He's got his mouth wide open. And he looks like he's screaming or shouting. So maybe this is meant to be the different people who represent different nations in the world, I suppose. Got the boy and the girl again pointing, saying they're reading history books now, and they say, it was a fight. And this is the picture that we saw in The Fearful Master, and this is the founding fathers, right? They talked the same language, but even so, it took them 13 years to weld the United States into one nation under the Constitution, 1776 to 1789. The nations of the world can follow the example of the 13 quarreling colonies. It will take the long-sighted faith of leaders like Washington, Jefferson, and Madison, and it will take time. And so Ed Griffin's comment was that the depiction of the Founding Fathers here is that they're cross-eyed, and they got big heads, and they're banging their fists on the table, pointing their finger accusatorily, I don't know what the word is I'm looking for there, accusingly. There's rats running around under the table, and they just kind of look a bit clownish and buffoonish and silly with their big heads. But interesting that Ed Griffin addressed this exact argument in the closing chapter of his book, didn't he? Well, isn't the United Nations just doing exactly what the federal government did with the 13 colonies? Okay. Now we're moving on with the story. It says, once upon a time, there were many different peoples, separated by little fences. These fences were made up of mountains, rivers, oceans, jungles, deserts. And who have we got? Well, we got some Eskimos up here. We've got Uncle Sam and his little fence, surrounded by his little fence. We've got some Native Americans. We've got a little dude in a sombrero. There's a whale over here eating somebody, happily swallowing an unfortunate swimmer. We've got a lady over here with a plate of fruit on her head. And this gentleman is fishing with a stick. The fences were nailed together with prejudice, ignorance, and fear. Each nation thought it was the most important. And here we got the English with our umbrella and monocle, standard English attire. We got the Scotsman in the Highlands up here with his bagpipes, and a variety of other people. Stereotypical people, but Chinese over here, I guess. This would be Vietnam, I think. And this lonely guy sitting on his desert island looking really sad. But yeah, apparently the reason people have nations, fences, borders, she's saying they're fences, but she's talking about borders. The reason for national borders is prejudice, ignorance, and fear. Because of fences, distance, and differences in language, nations had little to do with each other. They didn't trade. They didn't visit each other. They didn't send diplomatic envoys to go and explore. No, they just sat in their little fenced-off areas, just dwelling in their ignorance and their prejudice and their fear. That's history. And when they did meet, they had a fight. It was not easy for people to get together. For thousands and thousands of years, animals were about the only ways of travel and carrying things long distance. So there's a kangaroo, elephant, donkey, camel, there's a dog, horse, and that looks like some sort of alpaca or llama or something like that with long eyelashes. So we're sitting in our little prejudice fences, and we don't have much to do with each other because the only way we can get around is by animal. Then, suddenly, in the short space of just 1 century, airplanes, radios, diesels, and jet made all people neighbors. Oh, so suddenly we're neighbors now because we've got the combustion engine and railways and things. So now we're neighbors. Before we weren't neighbors before. We were just sitting in our little fences, enjoying our prejudice, ignorance, and fear, but we weren't neighbors. But now we're neighbors. And we got a American girl flying over. That's kind of I don't know. Is there something there's a bit of an innuendo there with the wing and the way she's kind of, I don't know, maybe she's got her handkerchief and she's looking down on the little I don't know, like South American boy on his donkey while she's flying along on the jet. There's the whale again, happy because of the guy that he ate on the other page. And the same on this side. We've got the ship taking people over to visit different countries. We've got the Chinese. Well, I guess that might be Vietnamese, actually. Meeting someone else who's just... she's just on a raft or something. So the travel turned us all into neighbors. You can wake up in San Francisco, put on your tux in New York, breakfast in London, lunch in Paris, ski in the Alps in the afternoon, dance in Spain that night, take a morning dip in the Nile, and go to bed the next night in South Africa. Maybe if you were one of the parasite elite class, you know? Actually, we are living and moving in one world. But this has all happened so fast that our minds have not kept pace. So this gentleman here, he's flying a helicopter, but his mind, down here, is still on a horse and cart. See, he's old school, old fashioned. He's not keeping up with the times in his mind. Of all living things, men and ants are the only ones who go in for organized destruction of their own kind. Ants will continue to practice the art of war. But men have the power of reason. Men should know enough to fight their real enemies: ignorance, hunger, disease. It is plain silly to fight each other. And just point out the comparison with ants. And the way that ants, like kind of like bees in a hive, ants in a nest, they have a queen, and it's that hive model, the hive mind and the hive model, which is so prevalent by these kind of controlling, psychopathic, scientific elites, right? So making that comparison is no accident, I don't think. And then there's all these pictures of these ants like shooting each other with bow and arrows and using tanks and howitzers and things. This guy showed up with a bow and arrow, and they got tanks on the go and rifles with bayonets, and he showed up with a bow and arrow. So yeah, fail for that guy. Okay. People began to think seriously about how they could live together as world citizens, and that is how the United Nations began. It didn't begin by a bunch of communists in America setting it up. Nothing to do with Fabian socialists. It was because people were thinking about how can we live together as world citizens. First, it was just an idea in people's minds. Then they put their thoughts into action. So actually, that's in line with the first Hermetic principle, which everything starts in the mind. The mind is the original source. One thing I noticed about this page is quite a few of these stars are 5-pointed stars and downward pointing with 1 point facing down. Not all of them, but there's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 5-pointed stars pointing down, which is, that has a symbolic meaning. And also you got the moon. The moon is here helping this string of people ascend and climb up to, I guess, view the world from outer space, or get a far enough view of the world so that they can have perspective. But yeah, you got the moon lending a helping hand there. United Nations. The United Nations is an international organization through which nations may expect to promote peace. The United Nations wants people all over the world to get into the habit of working together. At the same time, it strives to wipe out the causes of war. Within 4 short years from the time this idea was conceived, almost every nation in the world had applied for membership. Our own constitution was amended many times to make it a working model. The United Nations, too, can be changed. As Bob Hope has said, some people say this will always be the unfinished business, that nations will always be like small boys around a watermelon. But every American wants to rub out war. And the United Nations is the only eraser we've got left. You know, if Americans hadn't been born friendly and willing to give as well as take, we might never have wound up a united 48 states. We might have wound up 48 little nations. This union of 48 states wasn't an overnight thing, and it wasn't easy, no sir. As a small boy, Uncle Sam had to give a lot, take a lot, and learn a lot to achieve a United States. Let's try to do as much to achieve a United Nations. So they're saying exactly here that the model is like a federal government for the world. You know, that's the parallel that they're drawing in their own propaganda aimed at children. They want a federal government for the world. The United Nations has 6 main parts. The General Assembly. The General Assembly is the town meeting of the world. It meets once a year. Each nation, regardless of size, has 1 vote, although it may send 5 delegates. In this meeting, the nations talk about world problems and come to a general agreement as to what should be done. Their discussions are based upon public opinion. And here they are. This is the General Assembly. And they are sitting atop the world like a crown on the globe, like a halo on the very top, at a round table, and they're being smiled upon and shined on by the sun, while the moon down here is a bit confused, doesn't really know what's going on, is a bit concerned, and again surrounded by quite a number of downward pointing pentagrams. That's the word, right? Pentagrams. So they're atop the world, making decisions but they're taking public opinion into account. Yes, of course they are. All right, now we got the Security Council. The Security Council is on the job all the time. The 11 members serve like combination forest rangers and policemen. They spot trouble before it sets the world on fire. There are 5 permanent members: the United States, Great Britain, China, France, and Russia. There are 6 non-permanent members. These are elected by the General Assembly for 2-year terms. The 11 members act on the behalf of all the United Nations. It's interesting that China's included there, isn't it? I didn't realize China were right in it from the start in 1947. So we've got here kind of a security tower, and it's sort of like a excuse me. There's a bunch of soldiers climbing up there with their binoculars, spying on everyone and keeping their eye on everybody. And it's like a surveillance tower, basically. And there's more and more people marching along the ground, carrying their binoculars, climbing up the tower to get up there and to just pry and spy on the lives of everybody below them, I guess. And again, we got a downward pointing pentagram on the guy's jacket. And this one kind of looks like, if the binoculars sort of make a face, like their eyes looking straight out at the reader, like we're being watched, we're watching you. This one is the International Court of Justice. 15 justices are elected by the General Assembly for 9-year terms. They handle disputes that can be taken care of by judicial procedure, such as interpretation of treaties or disputes over boundaries. And on this picture, just one guy there with his gavel, although the hand doesn't really look like he's holding the gavel properly. But there's the judge. He's going to settle all the disagreements. Okay, next we've got the Secretariat. These are the people that do the day-to-day work. Staff members must be chosen from as many countries as possible. Almost all business done by the United Nations passes through the Secretariat. This body has great responsibility to all nations and must serve all impartially. Yeah, sure. Suppose the Secretary General had to dress in clothes representing all the countries he cares for. How many different garments would he have to put on? So if you remember Ed Griffin talking about secretariat was the most powerful part and the least accountable part of the United Nations. And you got a picture of here of a very happy person wearing some sort of Arab head clothing with a scarf, putting on some boots and a pajamas, and yeah, he's just getting dressed. I don't know why they've chosen this image for the secretariat, but I suppose they're trying to underlie the point that the people in the secretariat must be impartial to all nations. And so this person has a wardrobe full of different clothing in the styles of the different nations. But it just suggests like a chameleon type of person who will, like the clothes you wear dictate who you're who you're allied to and who you're going to represent and who you're going to work for and in favor of, you know. But I guess it's a children's book. We shouldn't read too much into it. All right, next we got the Trusteeship Council. Safeguards the rights of people in non-self-governing territories. The object of the council is to give these people a chance to be on their own as soon as they are able. This is the way the world is organized to achieve peace. And the image for this Trusteeship Council is a bird with a nest, and it looks like this bird has just kicked all the birdlings out and they're learning to fly. Cute. All right. Economic and Social Council. There's a bit more going on this page. Says, contented people don't want to fight. This council promotes better living standards among all people. She's like the old woman who lived in a shoe and had so many children. But she does know what to do. Like a modern mother, she's sincerely interested in her children's well-being. The council has many committees which work on such problems as unemployment, care of children, freedom of the press, etc. One commission coordinates all specialized agencies. And so we got Social Commission, handling the children, Fiscal Commission, that's the money, Statistical Commission, that's the propaganda, Economic and Employment, Transport, Communications, Demographic Commission, population. So there's a population control aspect to this as well. Commission on Narcotic Drugs. Yeah, that's important to control and maintain the flow of those. Very important. And Commission on the Status of Women. And on this one, we've got one commission coordinates all specialized agencies. The Coordinating Commission on Specialized Agencies. So this is the WHO, the World Health Organization. Friendly little doctor there. Looks like he is... Oh, he's a friendly little doctor using a stethoscope to listen to this chap's chest. For a second, I thought he might be giving, a boop boop, a little a jabby wabby in the arm there, but he's not. He's using a stethoscope. The ITO, the International Trade Organization. The International Bank for Reconstruction and Development. There's also the IRO, the International Refugee Organization. And then here's UNESCO, United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization. And there's the FAO, the Food and Agricultural Organization. And the ILO and the IMF, International Monetary Fund, to stabilize currency. Yes, I'm sure that's exactly what it does. Some jobs need special organizations to work them out. War-torn countries need loans. People driven from their homes need to be sent back or placed in new homes. Well, they don't get sent back very often, do they? And many countries need to know how to raise more and better food. Yes, we need more lab-grown meat. And here's a one-page diagram of the United Nations. We have, this is General Assembly, Security Council, International Court of Justice, and the top three. Then we've got trusteeship, secretariat, and it just goes out and out with more and more organizations in each ring. So, pretty complicated organization with many moving parts and layers to it. And the design here is one of rings within rings within rings. So this is your compartmentalized compartmentalized structure of, these guys report to these guys, but but on the outer ring, they have no idea what these guys in the inner rings their plans and their goals are, right? So rings within rings. That's the structure of a lot of these things. Peace is made in the minds of men. What is your mental attitude regarding our first big step toward world harmony? Are you helping to make it a success? Do you realize what great effect your own thinking has on your neighbor, your country, and your world? So here we've got, I like this page. This says, which one are you? Is your mind big or little? Have you got a big mind or have you got a little mind? So let's see what some of these people are saying. We've got this person here who's saying, I'm scared. So I guess that's a little mind being scared. Progress is always slow and painful. This good-looking young woman here says, I want to know more about the UN. And this attractive young lady here says, my part is small, but I know every person is important. These two guys over here, kind of bold-looking middle-aged chaps. This guy's got a ridiculous chin. They're the small minds. This pretty girl over here is asleep. She's not saying anything. And we've got a funny chap here who says, I've studied history. I know the UN won't work. He's got a ridiculous mustache and a sort of clownish checkerboard outfit on and a funny hat. There's a guy here that says Rome was not built in a day. And then this one is narrow-minded Mr. Noodle. And he says, we've never done it before, so we can't do it now. This girl says, my dad says it won't work. And then this fellow says, we invented jet. Why can't we invent peace? So that's the second time they've referred to jet. Not jets. Not the jet. Just jet. I don't know why. Look here on this page, right? Suddenly, in the short space of just 1 century, airplanes, radios, diesels, and jet made all people neighbors. It's a weird way to refer to it, isn't it? We invented jet, though, so we can invent peace. Like peace isn't just a natural thing that already exists. No, we need to invent it. This boy is daydreaming about driving his dad's car. This guy says, let's be patient and keep going. And there's a little owl here, that says, people seem to know how bad they are, but they don't half realize how good they can be. So do you want to be good? Do you want to be big-minded? Do you want to have a big mind and be a good person? Then you need to support and believe in the UN. Some more examples over here. It says, is your mind narrow, fossilized, or broad? Your mental attitude is important. So this fellow says, they should let me do it. And this one here with a tiny baby head says, I never bother about international affairs. We've got a lady here who says, if we really want to, we can make it succeed. And this guy has got a chip on his shoulder, and a big pointy sort of unicorn-like horn. He says, didn't I predict it? You can't change human nature. As the guy says, let's quit. This girl says, I can't look, it worries me. And a parrot that says, we've never done it before. So you got to make sure that you are not narrow, fossilized, or broad in your mind. You need to be big-minded. Okay. Next page it says, every personality is like a chessboard. The chessmen are assorted good and bad moods, impulses, traits, emotions. The good and the bad in your personality play against each other. So again, it's some weird territory now. But you got some self-reliance up here, laziness, love, gossipiness, which is this little cat thing here. You have generosity, hostility, concern for others, self-pity. You've got this one, poise, which stood out to me because this is an owl on the top of a pyramid. So that is quite a significant symbol to use, and poise is the quality it's describing. We've got temper, stick of dynamite. There's open-mindedness. There's intolerance. And next page says, you alone decide when, why, and what moves to make, and which players, the good or the bad, will win. This challenging chess game goes on all your life. Self-discipline, infantilism, sense of humor, defensiveness, sense of inferiority, dependability, ability to face facts, pride, and self-respect are some of the examples here. This one is a funny page as well and quite creepy. You can control your actions more easily than you can control your emotions. Try this experiment. When you feel blue, act happy. For a while, you'll be feeling one way, acting another. But before long, action will persuade feeling to its point of view. Try it and see. And check out this guy. He's feeling sad. And so even though he feels sad, he's just going to act happy. And then before long, whoop-de-doo, look at that. Doesn't he look completely happy? That guy looks like a psycho. He looks happier there. This one, he looks like he's going to murder somebody. He looks like he's forcing a smile. He's literally forcing a smile. Like, I'm really happy. I'm fine. Thank you. So ignore your feelings and just act the way you want to feel. And eventually that will overpower your actual feelings and cause you to feel differently. How do you behave when you feel angry? Have tantrums? Sock your little brother? Scold yourself? You must express it, and some sort of physical action helps. But don't waste your energy. Get rid of your anger symbolically. Play golf, tennis, or swim. Wash the car or cut the grass. Play a tune or draw a picture. You must first be at peace with yourself and your little brother before your thinking is big enough and clear enough to be a part of a worldwide movement toward peace. And then on this page, it's got a bunch of pictures of, instead of beating up your little brother when you're angry, you could play the piano or paint a picture or wash the car or play tennis. For some reason, this tennis ball has a face and doesn't look very happy about being whacked. All right, there's a few more pages left. Think for yourself. Learn to interpret the true meaning behind the words you read. Don't be like the home economics student who did her homework in the refrigerator just because the cookbook said mix ingredients, then set in a cool place. That's a terrible joke. But she's sitting in a cool place reading History of the World. It's good advice, though, to learn to interpret the true meaning behind the words you read, at least. Express yourself, but keep an open mind. Listen to what your neighbor has to say. There may be some way you can get together. I got a picture here of a little chap playing some sort of trumpet in his bedroom with his little dog having a nap while he's listening to a record player. And then here we've got a little storyboard. So it actually starts on the previous page with the guy playing trumpet in his room. And then the next panel, there's a gentleman over here and he's not enjoying the sound very much. He's got his fingers in his ears and he's gnashing his teeth. So he leaves his house and he goes stomping over. And then he's pointing at and telling off the trumpet player because he doesn't like his trumpet playing, presumably. And then they sit down and have a conversation. And then they're smiling and they're getting on with each other. And the neighbor leaves, goes back to his house, and he grabs a violin. And then he comes back and joins the trumpet player, and then they make music together. Trumpet and violin. How about that? Work with your neighbor. And this one is The United World in Action. And it's kind of an orchestra. You've got piano, double bass, trumpet players, trombones, all that. And all the different national clothes and outfits that we've seen throughout the book. And there's a waiting line at the bottom here because everybody wants to be part of this United Nations Orchestra. And in the middle here, you can see these two arms. These are the arms of the conductor But the conductor strangely doesn't have a body or a face or a figure. We can't recognize him. We can't see who it is exactly that's standing at the front, waving the baton, conducting this orchestra of United Nations. It's kind of left out. We can just see the two arms. So that's quite a curious detail. And then every nation and every individual, little or big, has an important part to play, without which the whole harmony would be incomplete. And so that harkens back to the very first video in this series, where we got onto Wikipedia and we read their definition of what the United Nations does. And it says that the United Nations works in concerting the member nations, concerting as a verb. And we had a look at that, and we found that that is not a very commonly used word. It goes back to the 1700s, and it meant back then to bring into order, or to align, or to bring into harmony, basically, was the meaning. So, yeah, interesting that they use harmony here, and they also use to concert the world's, the member states of the United Nations is on the Wikipedia description as well. And then also, of course, there's a waiting line at the bottom, because if you're not in the United Nations, you sure as hell want to be at some point, and everyone's just waiting to get in and join up. And then we're on to the last page, and the final message, which is, you as an individual have dignity and worth. You also have responsibility. The peace and security of the world depend on how you think, what you say, and how you act. And that is the end of you and the United Nations. So, lovely little artifact, wouldn't you agree? I'm just going to have a sip. It's not actually that bad. It's not too propagandistic. Although, in some parts of it I actually do agree with, I think. Like, especially that last bit. It is incredibly important. You do have dignity and worth, and you do have responsibility, and it is important how you think, what you say, and how you act. Just be very, very skeptical and question anything that comes from the United Nations, because I don't think they are the fount of peace and equality and fairness and justice that they want us to believe they are. But actually, I agree with all this last bit. So yeah, that's You and the United Nations by Lois Fisher, 1947 artifact. To indoctrinate young people into thinking on a global scale and not be drawn into the petty fights between nations. Okay, did you enjoy that? I'm going to have a quick review of the chats. Oh, we got Heidi on Rumble. Hello. Look up etymology for corporation, then look up conspiracy. Okay, I am going to do that. Not right now, but I will do it at some point. I see a corporation as a dead body speaking, corpse orating, pass the blame, never find anyone accountable. A dead body yet can't be restrained or held responsible for anything, the living dead. Right on, Heidi. I'm in 100% agreement with you there. It's the corpse oration. It's the oration of the corpse. It's the dead body, or the disembodied voice, the voice of the dead body, right? Which means it's a ghost. It's a non-living entity. It's not representative of the living world and the living creatures within the world. So, and that's by design, and that's on purpose. There's no way it's an accident. Conspiracy, I know, just means to breathe together, right? But yeah, good to know the meanings and the etymology of those two particular words. Definitely, Heidi, thank you. ESP says it's Popeye and Olive. I think you just spied them in the book, right? Popeye and Olive. All right, then, on YouTube, we'll review these, and then we'll get out of here. So the lunatic's boss is the moon. Oh, Shame Anarchist, yeah, thank you. And then a little conversation about globes and flat planets and these kind of things. I'm not going to weigh in on that because I'm too dumb to understand it. The word I used alongside ignorance was nescience, or nescient. I'll type it in again, nescient. I might have spelt nescience wrong. It's underlining it and says it's not a word, but it is a word. I promise you. It's just not a word they want us to know. Shamanicus, I was going to write down. He said we'll spell it out, but the chat got sidetracked. I've just put it in the chat there again for you if you need it. 3 doses of Prozac later. Yeah, some of the drawings in that book were quite funny, weren't they? And Fuego, it's interesting how they imply that emotions are divorced from reality, that they are arbitrary, the ideals of psychiatry. Yeah, that is a good point. And to not, to not trust your emotions, or to not get to the root of what's causing them, or address what's causing them. Just ignore them. Just overwrite them. Just pretend you're happy, and you will eventually be happy. So it's a bit like, it's a bit of a bottle it down. Don't feel it. Just ignore it. Don't get to the root of it. Yeah, it's not very good advice. He doesn't like seeing his neighbor blowing his own trumpet all the time. Extroverts and introverts. And then Shamanicus says, gotta go, peace and love, people. Well, thank you for joining in. I know it's been a bit of a long one tonight, but I thought because it's the final in this series, we do a little bit extra as well. But thanks for hanging in there. I hope you have a good evening. Okay, I think I'm all up to speed on the comments. And I think it's about time to wrap up and get out of here for the night. We'll do another video this probably Saturday evening, and we'll go through. Remember, we've got all these extras to get through, which came with the book. We'll do a few of those. And I thought as well, what I might do is I might read out all the stuff in the Rockefeller books pertaining to the UN and its origin, because I think that's relevant too. So we'll have a part 8, and that'll just be extra materials. That'll be Saturday night. So please keep an eye out for that. Usual time, 7 o'clock. I will announce that on Telegram, Twitter, and Instagram, where you can find me at Hayes Reviews. That's where I announce when I'm going live. As always, allmylinks.com/Hayes Reviews if you are interested in supporting or joining the social media or finding out where I stream and joining the channels. All the liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting, all that stuff is very good and very helpful. Helps us grow and get to the right people and find the people who are interested in this kind of information and this kind of long form content, because it's not everybody's cup of tea. But there are people out there who dig this kind of thing. And so if you're one of them, I'm very glad and grateful to have you aboard and participating. So, I'm going to leave it there, I think. I'll play you out with a little bit of guitar music. Don't forget, if you want to join the mailing list, you can send an email to autonomoususername@gmail.com. I'll send you a free gift, which is a bundle of my lovingly crafted acoustic guitar music. And I'll add you to the mailing list. Then we can stay in touch. In case anything ever happens to my online channels, my presence here could be, you never know. You never know what's going to happen. A lot of hate speech laws coming in, a lot of control over platforms and regulation of platforms and all this kind of silly nonsense. So if I've got your email in my mailing list, then I can at least shoot you a message and tell you where I am if I have to relocate and pop up somewhere else. So please consider doing that, and be a big help. And yeah, if you want to donate, that would be much appreciated as well. Keeps the wheel turning, and definitely helps me kind of build out this and make it into something that's even more valuable and helpful to people. So I will leave it there. Thank you very much for being part of this and joining along for this extra long episode. We're on 3.5 hours almost. But hope it was useful and you enjoyed it, and I will see you again Saturday night. God bless.